Most campgrounds have rules: check-in times, check-out times, license plates recorded at the gate. But sometimes, the system says you were already there, already logged, already checked in, already staying longer than you remember. Tonight, these are 7 camping stories where the records didn't match reality. Before we begin, comment your time and where you're watching from. Let's get into it. I chose the campground because it looked small. 12 sites. First come, first served. No reservation system, no camp host on site. Just a metal gate at the entrance and a wooden board with rules burned into it. It was late September in southern Utah. The kind of dry heat that lingers even after sunset. The road in was gravel for about 6 miles. No other vehicles passed me the whole way. That felt like a good sign. The board near the entrance listed the basics. Quiet hours, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. Gate closes automatically at 10 p.m. Self-pay kiosk, exact cash only. Underneath that, in smaller print, no re-entry after gate closure. I remember thinking that was strict for such a small place. I pulled in around 6:30 p.m. The sun was low, but still bright enough to paint the cliffs orange. There were only 2 other vehicles inside. One pickup near Site 3, an older white van near Site 9. I chose Site 6, middle of the loop. Good line of sight to the road and the gate. I filled out the envelope at the self-pay box, tucked the carbon copy onto my dashboard, slid the rest into the metal slot. The gate was open when I arrived. A tall, dark steel frame with horizontal bars, solar panel mounted on a pole beside it, a keypad and a small digital screen under a plastic shield. It didn't look old. It didn't look broken. I walked up to it before dinner, just to check how it worked. There was a large green button labeled Exit. Under it, a small screen that read, Gate closes at 10 p.m. Simple enough. Back at my truck camper, I cooked something easy, pasta. Nothing that would attract animals. The air cooled quickly after sunset, the kind of desert drop where the temperature falls 20 degrees in an hour. Around 8:45 p.m., I noticed the pickup at Site 3 leave. Headlights swept across the inside of the loop, then out toward the road. The gate remained open. I didn't hear it close after. The white van was still parked at Site 9. No lights on. No movement. By 9:05 p.m., it was fully dark. No moon. The sky was clear enough that the stars felt sharp. I was sitting inside the camper with the door cracked for air when I heard the sound. A low electric hum. At first I thought it was someone starting a generator, but it was too smooth, too steady. I stepped outside. The hum grew louder for about 3 seconds, then stopped. Metal clanked. I turned toward the entrance. The gate was sliding shut, not slowly, not hesitantly. It moved with clean mechanical certainty until the 2 halves met in the middle. There was a heavy click as it locked. I checked my watch, 9:12 p.m. I stood there longer than I needed to. The sign had clearly said 10 p.m. I walked toward the entrance, gravel crunching under my boots. The rest of the campground was silent. The white van at Site 9 was still there, no lights on. When I reached the gate, I looked at the digital screen. Gate closed. Time, 21:12. I stared at it. Below the time display, smaller text scrolled. System secured. I pressed the green exit button. Nothing happened. I pressed it again, harder this time. The screen flickered, then changed. Vehicle already exited. I stepped back. That didn't make sense. I was standing inside the campground. My truck was still parked at Site 6. The engine was cold. I looked at the hinges, the track, the lock housing. No visible damage. No manual override handle that I could see. Above the keypad, mounted higher than I'd noticed before, was a small dome camera, black casing, clear lens. It wasn't pointed toward the road outside. It was pointed inward, directly into the campground. A tiny red light blinked once, then went steady. I told myself it was just part of the system, probably triggered by motion, probably recording the loop for security. Still, the sign had said 10 p.m. I walked back to my site slowly, not because I was afraid, just because I was thinking. Maybe they changed the schedule and forgot to update the board. Maybe the system clock was off. Maybe the white van at Site 9 had triggered something. I glanced towards Site 9. The van was still there, but now I couldn't see clearly whether anyone was inside. The windows were dark, no curtains moving, no door opening. The campground felt smaller suddenly, like the loop had tightened around itself. At 9:12 p.m., the gate had decided the day was over, and according to the screen, I had already left. I stood there in the dark for another minute. The red light on the camera didn't blink again. It just stayed on. I didn't go back inside right away. I stood there looking at the screen again. Vehicle already exited. The wording bothered me more than the time. It didn't say access denied. It didn't say gate locked. It said I had already left. I pressed the green exit button again. The motor made a short clicking sound, then stopped. No movement. The red light above the camera stayed solid. I stepped closer to the keypad. There was a small sticker beneath it with a phone number for assistance. A local area code, the kind used for rural counties. I pulled out my phone. 1 bar of signal. I dialed. It rang once, then straight to voicemail. A generic message answered. You've reached campground management. Leave your site number and we'll return your call during business hours. Business hours. I looked around the loop. The campground was too quiet. The desert at night is never silent. There are insects, wind, something moving in brush. But right then, I heard almost nothing. I hung up and tried again. This time it didn't ring at all. Call failed. I turned in a slow circle. Site 3 was empty now, just the dark square where the pickup had been. Site 9 still had the white van. No lights inside it, no movement. I realized something. If the system thought my vehicle had exited at 9:11 p.m., that meant it had logged a plate number, or a sensor had been triggered. But I hadn't moved my truck. The engine was still cold. I walked back towards Site 6, gravel crunching under my boots. I didn't rush. I didn't feel afraid exactly, just unsettled. I opened the camper door and checked my dashboard. The pay stub was still there under the windshield, carbon copy with today's date. My truck keys were still on the counter inside. Nothing had moved. I stepped back out and looked toward the entrance again. The gate looked final now, not temporary, not like something that would open if I just waited. I glanced up at the camera. It was mounted higher than I'd realized. Slight downward angle, covering the entire interior loop. It wasn't protecting the outside. It was watching us. I scanned for other cameras. I found another one near the pay kiosk. Same dome style, same red light, facing inward. I walked slowly towards Site 9, not to confront anyone, just to see if the van's occupant had noticed anything strange. The van's windows were tinted, but not fully blacked out. I could see faint outlines inside. No interior light, no shadow moving. I stopped about 10 feet away. Hello? My voice sounded too loud in the open air. No response. I waited. Still nothing. I stepped closer, close enough to see my own reflection in the glass. The van looked lived in. Curtains folded near the front windshield. A small solar panel on top. Nothing unusual. I knocked lightly on the side panel. The sound echoed more than I expected. No movement inside. No shifting weight. No cough. No rustle. I stepped back. If someone was inside, they were choosing not to answer. I told myself they probably locked in early, maybe asleep, maybe headphones on. I didn't knock again. On my way back to my site, I looked toward the perimeter fence. Chain link, about 6 feet high. Nothing dramatic. Beyond it was open desert and low scrub, the kind of terrain you could walk across if you really needed to, but not with a vehicle. The sign had been clear, no re-entry after gate closure. It hadn't said anything about early closure. I checked my watch again, 9:27 p.m., still nearly half an hour before the posted time. I walked back to the entrance one more time. This time I didn't press the button. I just read the screen carefully. Gate closed. System secured. Time, 21:27. The numbers updated correctly, so the clock wasn't wrong. I crouched slightly and examined the base of the gate. No obvious manual release. No padlock I could cut. Everything integrated into the track system. The kind of installation meant to prevent tampering. I straightened up. The red light above me flickered once, then stayed steady again. I had the uncomfortable thought that somewhere, someone might be watching the feed live. Not just recording, watching. I stepped out of the camera's direct line and moved to the side of the entrance. The red light didn't change. I took another step farther to the edge of the loop, still steady. It didn't track movement, it just remained active. I stood there long enough that the desert chill began to creep under my jacket. Behind me, deeper in the campground, something shifted. A small metallic sound. Not loud, not sharp, just enough to make me turn. I looked towards Site 9. The van was still there, but now I was certain of something I hadn't noticed before. Its rear doors were slightly open, not wide, just enough to create a thin vertical line of darker black against the night. I was almost sure they had been closed earlier. Almost. I stared at that thin line for a long time, waiting to see if it widened, waiting to see if someone stepped out. Nothing happened. The red camera light at the gate remained steady. I became aware of how exposed the middle of the loop felt. No trees thick enough to hide behind. No large boulders near my sight. Just open ground and parked vehicles. I walked back to my camper slowly. I locked the door from inside. And for the first time that evening, I realized something simple. Even if I wanted to leave, I couldn't. I didn't sleep right away. I told myself I was being dramatic. That was my first instinct, to downplay it, to treat it like a minor inconvenience. The gate closed early. The system log was wrong. Someone would fix it in the morning. That should have been the end of it. But I kept seeing the words on the screen. Vehicle already exited, as if the system was insisting on a version of the night that hadn't happened. I sat on the edge of the camper bed and listened. No footsteps, no voices, no engine turning over. Just the low, cooling clicks of metal and plastic as the temperature dropped. At 9:40 p.m., I checked outside again. The white van at Site 9 was still dark. The rear doors looked closed now. I couldn't be certain. The darkness swallowed details and fed doubt back into my head. But the thin vertical line I'd seen earlier was gone. That made my stomach tighten in a way I didn't like. I stepped out with my phone in my hand, using the screen glow as a weak flashlight. I didn't turn on my main lights. I didn't want to announce myself. I walked halfway towards Site 9 and stopped. Nothing moved. I looked toward the pay kiosk. The small dome camera near it still had its red light on. I looked toward the gate. That red light was on too. Two eyes, pointing inward. I thought about leaving on foot. It wasn't impossible. The desert beyond the fence was open. I could climb chain link if I had to. I could walk to the main road and flag someone down. But the idea of leaving my truck behind felt wrong. It felt like surrendering my only solid thing in the middle of something that was starting to feel procedural. Like this place had rules, and the rules were being applied to me. I went back inside and locked the door again. At 10:03 p.m., I heard the gate motor. It wasn't opening. It was just a short burst, like a test, like the system checking itself. A few seconds later, I heard it again. Test. Pause. Test. I pictured someone at a laptop watching the cameras, running the mechanism, seeing if I reacted. I hated that thought. I opened the curtain just enough to look out. The gate didn't move. The red light stayed steady. No headlights outside, no vehicle waiting. No reason for it to be testing itself. I set my phone on the counter and tried the hotline number again. No signal. The single bar was gone. I stepped closer to the window and held the phone higher, like that would coax the air into cooperating. One bar flickered, then vanished. Call failed. I stood there, phone raised, in a posture that suddenly felt humiliating, like I was asking permission. I put the phone down. Then I heard it, a sound from outside my camper. Not a footstep, not a branch snapping, a soft drag, gravel shifting in a slow line. I froze. I waited for it to continue. It didn't. I moved to the door and pressed my ear against it. Nothing. I told myself it could have been a small animal. Then I remembered the ground here. Dry, hard-packed, sparse brush. Not a lot of wildlife would wander into the loop this casually. I unlocked the door slowly and opened it an inch. Cold air slid inside. I kept the opening narrow and looked out through the crack. The loop was empty, but something was different near my truck, my passenger side mirror. It was folded in. I stared at it for a long time. I hadn't folded it in. I never did. Not unless I was parking tight. My truck was parked alone in a wide sight. The mirror should have been out. I stepped outside fully and walked to the passenger side. The mirror was folded inward, pressed close to the window, as if someone had brushed past and tucked it in by habit. I unfolded it again, slowly, listening for any movement around me. Nothing. I looked down at the ground near that side of the truck. The soil was pale and dusty. My own footprints were clear from earlier, and beside them, overlapping the edge of one of my prints, was a scuff mark. Not a clean boot print, not a tread pattern, just a smear, like someone had shifted their weight there and then lifted their foot straight up. I followed the smear with my eyes. It led away toward the middle of the loop, then disappeared into the general noise of dirt and gravel. I stood up and looked toward Site 9. The van was still there, still dark, still silent. But now I noticed something else. The van's front wheels were turned slightly, angled outward, as if the driver had parked in a hurry or expected to pull out quickly. I tried to remember how it had been earlier. I couldn't. That was the worst part. Not knowing whether the details were changing or whether my memory was being edited by stress. I walked a little closer to the fence line and looked beyond it. The desert was open and black. Then, for a moment, a faint glow appeared out there, low to the ground, not bright, not a flashlight beam, more like a small screen, a cigarette, something shielded by a hand. It blinked on, then off. I held my breath. The glow appeared again, in the same spot, as if whoever held it hadn't moved. Then it went dark for good. I backed toward my camper without turning my back on the fence. I hated myself for doing that, for acting like prey. When I got inside, I locked the door. Then I sat on the floor with my back against it, listening. At 10:21 p.m., I heard the gate motor again. This time, it was longer, as if the gate tried to open. It didn't. The sound strained for 3 seconds, then stopped. A second later, the same sound happened again. Strain, stop. Like the system was being told to do something it couldn't do. I looked at my watch. 10:21 p.m. The posted closure time had passed. If the system was following the posted rules, it should have already been closed. So why was it trying to move now? A new thought formed, slow and unpleasant. Maybe it wasn't trying to open for someone outside. Maybe it was trying to open for me. Maybe it had been told I needed to exit, and it couldn't reconcile that with the log that said I already had. I stayed on the floor until my legs went numb. Sometime after midnight, I fell asleep in short, ugly pieces. And every time I woke up, the same thing was true. The campground was still too quiet, and the red lights on the cameras never turned off. I woke up at 5:58 a.m., not because of noise, because of light. The desert sunrise doesn't ease in gently. It floods everything at once. Pale blue first, then sharp gold. For a second, I forgot where I was. Then I remembered the gate. I grabbed my keys and stepped outside. The air was cold enough that I could see my breath. Site 9. The white van was gone. No engine sound. No gravel crunch. No headlights in the distance. Just gone. I stood there trying to reconstruct when it could have left. I hadn't heard the gate open during the night. I would have heard it. It wasn't a quiet mechanism. I walked quickly toward the entrance. The gate was still closed, locked in place. The digital screen glowed in the morning light. Gate closed. Time, 6:07. I pressed the exit button. The motor engaged this time. For a moment, I felt relief. Then the screen changed. Exit logged, 21:11. Access denied. I stared at the timestamp, 21:11. 1 minute before I heard the gate close. At the camera. The red light was still on at the camera. The red light was still on. In daylight, it looked smaller, less dramatic, but it was still pointed inward. I walked to where the van had been parked. The ground was dry and pale. Tire tracks from my own vehicle were clear. The van's tracks were faint but visible. They led toward the gate, but they stopped several feet before it. Not at the gate, before it, as if the van had rolled forward, and then simply disappeared. I crouched and studied the dirt. No sharp turn marks, no backing up, no looping around. Just a set of tracks that ended in open space. I stood up slowly. That was the moment something shifted inside me. Not fear, resignation. This place had already decided what happened last night. The log said I left. The gate said I left. The other vehicle had left, and I was the only one left to argue with the screen. At 8:37 a.m., a white county truck pulled up outside the fence. I heard it before I saw it. The ranger stepped out, mid-40s, sunglasses, neutral expression. He walked to the keypad and entered a code. The gate opened immediately, clean, smooth, no hesitation. He looked at me like I'd been standing there all morning waiting for him. "You have trouble getting out?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "It closed early, around 9:12. The sign says 10. He glanced at the board briefly. "It's always been 9, he said. "It says 10. He shrugged. "System logs show your vehicle exited at 9:11 p.m., then re-entered without registering. I never left." He didn't argue. He didn't agree either. He tapped the keypad again and showed me the small admin screen. There it was. Plate recognition entry. 9:11 p.m. Exit. No entry after. "You probably rolled close enough to trigger the sensor," he said. "Happens sometimes." I thought about the folded mirror, the scuff in the dirt, the gate motor straining at 10:21 p.m., the van that had been there, then wasn't. I didn't explain any of that. He stepped aside and waved me forward. "Gate's working fine," he said. "Just make sure you're out before close next time." I drove slowly toward the exit. As my truck passed under the camera, I looked up. The red light was off now, completely dark. No blink, no steady glow, nothing. I crossed the threshold. The gate slid shut behind me with the same mechanical certainty as the night before. I checked the sign one last time in my rearview mirror. Quiet hours, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. Gate closes automatically at 10 p.m. The numbers were clear, unfaded, untouched. I drove the 6 miles back to the highway without seeing another vehicle. When I reached cell service, my phone vibrated. A voicemail notification. Time stamped 9:13 p.m. I pulled over and listened. There was no voice, no background noise, just 3 seconds of low electrical hum. Then the sound of a gate locking, and after that, silence. We chose that road because it didn't look maintained. That sounds backward, but anyone who does dispersed camping in Oregon knows what I mean. The less maintained the Forest Service road looks, the less likely you are to find a cluster of RVs with satellite dishes and generators running all night. The sign at the turnoff read, "FS Road 2147, no services, no cell coverage beyond this point." It was late October, damp but not freezing. The kind of cold that stays in the soil rather than the air. We drove about 4 miles in before the pavement ended completely and turned into packed dirt with loose gravel. No other tire tracks looked fresh, just old impressions softened by last week's rain. "That's good," my wife said. It was. We passed two clearings that could have worked as campsites. Fire rings made of loose rock, flattened earth, but both were too close to the main stretch of road. I prefer not being visible from a passing truck. About another mile in, the road narrowed and curved along a shallow drop toward thicker trees. That's where we found it. A small clearing just wide enough for one vehicle. A fire ring. A couple of cut stumps used as makeshift stools. No trash. No recent ash. No sign of anyone staying there in at least a week. Perfect. I backed the truck into the clearing so the front faced outward toward the road. I always do that. Makes leaving easier in the morning. The road we came in on was the only one. No side trails branching off. No visible alternate routes. That was part of the appeal. We unloaded slowly. Nothing fancy, just folding chairs, a small cooler, firewood we'd brought with us to avoid transporting invasive insects. By 6:45 p.m., the forest had shifted into that muted gray tone it gets before darkness settles. The trees there were tall and tight together. Not dense brush, just vertical trunks, evenly spaced, like the place had been planted intentionally decades ago. It felt orderly. We ate early, simple food, nothing loud, nothing that required more than one pot. There was no wind that night, not even a light drift through the canopy. Around 8:30 p.m., while I was stacking leftover wood near the fire ring, I heard something that didn't belong, a faint buzzing. At first I thought it was an insect near my ear. I swatted reflexively. The sound didn't move. It grew slightly louder. I looked up. It took me a second to find it against the darkening sky. There were no blinking navigation lights, no red or green FAA indicators, just a small, dark shape, hovering maybe 30 feet above the clearing. A drone. Not large, consumer-sized, I think, hard to judge in low light. It wasn't moving in a sweeping pattern like someone filming scenery. It was stationary, pointed directly at us. My wife stepped closer to me. "Is that?" "Yeah," I said. We both stood there looking up at it. No voice came from it, no spotlight, no visible camera lens reflecting light, just the hum. After maybe 10 seconds, it shifted slightly to the left, then right, almost like correcting its balance. Then it rose higher, not quickly, smoothly, deliberately. It hovered another moment, then it drifted away, not deeper into the forest, not across the treetops. It followed the direction of the road we had driven in on, back the way we came. We listened until the hum faded completely. Neither of us spoke for a few seconds. "Maybe someone's camping further out," she said. Maybe, but we both knew what that meant. If someone was camping further out, that meant they had driven past us at some point without us noticing. I walked to the edge of the clearing and looked down the road. No headlights, no engine noise, no sign of movement. The forest swallowed sound quickly at night. You could hear something 50 yards away clearly, then nothing beyond that. I told myself it wasn't illegal, not technically. People fly drones all the time. Maybe they were mapping trails. Maybe it was just someone bored. Still, it had hovered directly over our site. Not scanning, not passing through, watching. We put the fire out earlier than planned. At 9:15 p.m., the clearing was completely dark except for the dim light inside our truck camper. I stepped outside one more time before turning in. The road out was a pale strip through the trees. Narrow, quiet. The exact same road we would use in the morning. No branches hung low across it. No fallen debris. No obstruction of any kind. Clear in, clear out. I remember looking at it longer than I needed to, just to make sure. Then I went inside and locked the door. Sometime after midnight, I woke briefly to a distant sound, not the drone, something heavier, a dull crack, followed by silence. I lay there listening for wind. There wasn't any. After a minute, I convinced myself it had been a tree settling somewhere far off in the dark. Forests make noises at night. They shift, they release tension, they break under their own weight. I closed my eyes again, and when morning came, the road out was no longer clear. Morning in that part of Oregon comes in layers. First the gray, then the damp smell rising off the soil, then the filtered light sliding between the trunks. I woke up thinking about the sound from the night before, that dull crack, not loud enough to panic me, just distinct enough to remember. My wife was already up, sitting near the open camper door with a mug in her hands. "Did you hear that last night?" she asked quietly. "The crack?" She nodded. "No wind," she said. There hadn't been any. I stepped outside and looked toward the road. At first, nothing registered as wrong. The same pale strip of dirt and gravel stretched between the trees. The same curve about 50 yards out where the road dipped slightly. It looked the same, but something felt closer. I walked toward it slowly. The air was still, no birds yet, no distant engine noise from the highway miles away. When I reached the bend in the road, I stopped. The tree was enormous. It hadn't just fallen across the road. It had landed perfectly perpendicular to it, blocking it completely from one tree line to the other. The trunk was thick, at least 2 feet across at the base, heavy, solid. There was no driving around it, no squeezing past. The entire width of the road was sealed. I stood there for several seconds without moving. It didn't look like storm damage. The sky had been clear. There was no splintered chaos in the surrounding canopy, no snapped branches above. The tree hadn't ripped down from high up, it had come from the side. I stepped closer. The leaves were still green, bright, not wilted, not drying, fresh. I touched the exposed wood near the break. It wasn't rough and jagged the way a natural fall usually is. One side of the trunk was torn where it hit the ground, but the other side, the side facing us, it was flat, too flat, like it had been cut, not clean like a lumberyard finish, but controlled. There were marks, parallel grooves across the surface, chainsaw marks. I ran my fingers across them. They were recent. The wood felt slightly damp, not yet dried by air. I stood up and looked around. The surrounding trees were undisturbed, no additional debris, no sawdust scattered wildly, just the tree across the road. Placed. The word formed before I wanted it to. Placed. My wife walked up beside me. She didn't say anything at first. She just stared at it. "Could someone have cut it yesterday?" she asked. "Not without us hearing," I said. "Chainsaws in a forest don't go unnoticed. Even miles away, they echo." We had heard nothing like that. I stepped over the trunk and looked at the other side of the road. Clear. No additional obstacles. No skid marks from heavy equipment. No tire tracks other than ours. I crouched and examined the dirt near the base of the trunk. There were impressions there. Not clean footprints. Just compressed soil where someone might have stood while cutting. The ground wasn't wet enough to preserve detail, but it wasn't untouched either. I stood up and scanned the tree line. The forest looked the same as it had last night. Orderly, quiet, watching. I felt a strange hesitation about walking too far down the road on the other side of the tree, as if crossing that line meant committing to something. I climbed back over and returned to our side. "We can't move that," my wife said. She was right. Even with a winch, it would have taken hours. We didn't carry a chainsaw. We weren't planning to do logging. I walked back toward the campsite and looked at the truck, still backed in toward the road, ready to leave. Except now the only path out was sealed by a tree that hadn't been there 8 hours ago. I checked my phone. No signal. I held it up anyway. Nothing. I turned slowly, taking in the full perimeter of the clearing. The road behind us was the only one. No side trails. No alternate routes cut through the trees. Just that narrow entry we had driven in on. Blocked. My eyes drifted upward instinctively. The sky between the branches was pale blue now. Empty. No drone. No movement. But I couldn't shake the memory of where it had flown the night before. Down the road. Back the way we came. As if tracing the exact route that would matter in the morning. A thought began forming. Slowly. Uncomfortably. The drone had hovered over our site, then followed the road out. Later that night, we heard a crack, and by morning, the only road out was cut off by a tree with chainsaw marks. I didn't say that out loud, not yet. Instead, I stepped closer to the trunk one more time and studied the cut surface. The grooves were fresh enough that tiny curls of wood still clung to the bark. Whoever cut it had done so recently, very recently. I felt something tighten in my chest, not panic. Calculate. Someone had been here after dark, someone with a saw, and we hadn't heard them. Or worse, we had heard them, and decided it was just the forest shifting. I stepped back from the tree. The clearing behind me suddenly felt smaller, not because of the trees, because of the road. It wasn't a road anymore, it was a wall, and we were on the wrong side of it. We didn't panic right away. That's the strange thing about situations like that. Your brain refuses to escalate as quickly as the circumstances do. It could have been cut days ago, my wife said. And just fell last night? I asked. She didn't answer. We walked back to the truck and stood there quietly, both of us looking at the same thing. The road in had always felt narrow but manageable. Now it felt engineered. One lane, no shoulder, trees tight on both sides, no space to turn around beyond our clearing. If someone wanted to block it, they wouldn't need much. They had chosen the right tree. I grabbed the small folding saw from our gearbox. It wasn't meant for anything this size. It was for trimming branches, clearing small debris. Still, I walked back to the trunk and tried cutting at one of the thinner limbs jutting off the side. It barely made a mark. The wood was dense, wet, fresh. This wasn't a deadfall. This was a live tree, recently alive. After a few minutes, I stopped. The saw was useless. We stood there again in the quiet. Then we heard it. Not a chainsaw, not a vehicle. A distant mechanical buzz. Faint, high-pitched. I felt my jaw tighten. The sound grew slightly louder for a moment, then stopped. I scanned the sky between the treetops. Nothing. But the sound hadn't come from above this time. It had come from down the road, beyond the fallen tree, on the other side. I stepped over the trunk again and walked a few yards farther down the road. My wife stayed behind me this time. The dirt beyond the obstruction was smooth, except for one thing. A new set of tracks. Not tire tracks, boot prints, clearer than the scuffs near the trunk. The soil here was softer. The prints led from the trees on the right side of the road toward the trunk, then back again. Measured steps, not running, not stumbling, just walking. I crouched down. The tread wasn't distinctive enough to identify a brand, but it was deeper than my own boot marks, heavier, or carrying something. I stood up slowly. "Someone was here," I said. "I know," she replied. There was no denial in her voice anymore, just calculation. I looked toward the tree line where the prints disappeared. Dense but not impenetrable. A person could move through there quietly if they knew the terrain. The buzzing sound came again, shorter this time, then silence. My eyes snapped upward instinctively, still nothing. The canopy blocked most of the sky now that the sun had climbed higher. If a drone was there, it could hover unseen between branches, watching without being seen. The thought settled into my stomach like weight. The drone last night, the crack in the dark, the fresh cut, the boot prints. This wasn't random. This was sequential. I walked back over the trunk and returned to our side. "We need to decide," I said. "Decide what? Stay with the truck or hike out." The nearest paved road was roughly 4 miles back. We could walk it in under 2 hours, if nothing slowed us down, if no one blocked us again. Leaving the truck felt like giving up our shelter, our supplies, our locked space. But staying meant being stationary, predictable. I turned slowly, scanning the full perimeter of the clearing again. The forest looked unchanged. Trees in evenly spaced rows, damp soil, filtered light, peaceful. That was the problem. Nothing in the environment reflected what the situation had become. There were no raised voices, no threats shouted from the trees, no visible figure watching from behind a trunk, just infrastructure quietly removed, just options reduced. I walked back to the truck and checked the fuel level, nearly full. That didn't matter. Fuel meant movement. Movement required road, and the road was no longer ours. Then something else caught my attention. On the far edge of the clearing, opposite the road, near the fence of brush and low trees, I noticed a thin line of disturbed soil. I walked toward it. It wasn't deep enough to be a trench, just a drag mark, as if something cylindrical had been pulled lightly across the ground and then lifted. It ran parallel to the edge of our site, and it hadn't been there yesterday. I followed it with my eyes. It led toward the direction the drone had flown, toward the road, toward the tree. A cold realization moved through me. We weren't being rushed. We weren't being confronted. We were being observed, contained first, then watched to see what we would do. The buzzing sound came again, longer this time, closer, not loud enough to pinpoint, but near enough that the air felt charged. I looked at my wife. "We're not alone," I said. She didn't argue. She just nodded once. And that was the moment the forest stopped feeling like wilderness and started feeling like a boundary. We decided to walk, not because it felt safe, because staying felt worse. We packed light, water, keys, phone, a small first aid pouch. I locked the truck, even though the idea of locking anything felt symbolic at that point. Before leaving, I stood still for a moment and listened. No buzzing, no movement, just the forest holding itself in place. We climbed over the fallen trunk one last time and started down the road on foot. The dirt was soft enough to hold prints, but firm enough not to slow us down. The air smelled faintly of sap from the cut tree. I kept glancing at the tree line on both sides, not expecting someone to step out, just trying to detect a pattern, something out of alignment. After about half a mile, we both heard it again. The buzz. Clear this time, above us. We stopped at the same moment. The drone hovered maybe 40 feet up, just beyond a gap in the canopy. No navigation lights, no visible markings. It didn't descend. It didn't circle aggressively. It simply held position, facing us. I felt a surge of anger that surprised me. "Show yourself," I said under my breath. The drone tilted slightly, adjusting its angle. Then it drifted backward, not retreating fast, not fleeing, just maintaining distance as we continued walking. It stayed ahead of us, never closer than 30 feet, never farther than 50, as if guiding or monitoring. After another quarter mile, it rose higher and disappeared into the trees. The silence that followed felt heavier than the noise. We walked another mile. No additional obstacles. No vehicles coming toward us. No chainsaws. No visible human presence. When we finally reached the main gravel junction that connected to the highway, the road was empty. No parked trucks. No tire tracks fresh enough to suggest recent movement. We stood there, breathing hard. The forest behind us looked unchanged, calm, indifferent. I pulled out my phone. 1 bar, then 2. I turned to look back down the road we had just walked. Nothing moved. The drone did not reappear. "We call someone?" she asked. I hesitated. Call who? Report what? A fallen tree? A drone? Boot prints? Nothing that crossed a clear legal line. Just infrastructure quietly removed. Just presence implied. We stood there another minute. Then I made a decision that felt practical at the time. We would walk back, drive out once the tree was cleared, because someone had to clear it, either whoever cut it or us, eventually. When we returned to the fallen trunk, the forest was silent again. No buzzing, no shifting branches, no voices, and the tree was no longer blocking the road. It had been cut into sections, neatly. The largest part rolled just enough to open a lane wide enough for one vehicle. No equipment left behind, no footprints distinct enough to follow, just the scent of fresh sap. I stood there staring at the space where it had been. The cut surfaces were cleaner now, finished, intentional. Whoever had done it had returned while we were gone. Not to trap us longer, just long enough. just enough to see what we would do. I walked slowly back to the truck. Neither of us spoke. We loaded up without rushing. I kept expecting to hear the drone again. It never came. I drove carefully over the disturbed dirt and out onto the road. The forest closed behind us the way it always does, without commentary. When we reached the highway, I checked the rearview mirror one last time. No vehicle followed, no drone in the sky, no visible sign that anyone had been there at all. Weeks later, I went back through the dash cam footage from that trip. The camera had been on when we arrived. It had recorded the clearing, the road, the exact stretch where the tree later fell. At 11:47 p.m., there was a brief flicker in the frame, just 3 seconds. The image darkened slightly, like something large passed between the lens and the sky. There was no audio, no visible chainsaw, no person, just that momentary shadow across the road. The timestamp read 23:47. The crack we had heard came at 11:48 p.m. I replayed the clip several times, trying to see a shape, a person, a vehicle, anything. There was nothing clear, just the forest, and the brief suggestion that something had been there. Close enough to block the lens, long enough to make sure we stayed, and left only when we were supposed to. I picked that lake because it didn't have a dock. Most people prefer docks. They like structure, something stable to tie off to. I prefer gravel ramps and quiet shorelines. This one was in northern Minnesota, about 40 minutes from the nearest small town. The sign at the turnoff had the DNR logo burned into weathered wood. No office, no host, just a narrow gravel road that ended at water. There were 6 campsites scattered along the tree line. First come, first served. When I arrived around 4:15 p.m., all of them were empty. No RVs, no trucks, no boats on trailers, just the lake. The water was still, not glassy, just heavy. The kind of stillness that absorbs sound instead of reflecting it. I chose the site closest to the boat ramp. The ramp itself wasn't concrete, just packed gravel sloping into the water. No dock, no barrier arm, no chain. I backed my small trailer down carefully. The tires rolled over loose stones and settled near the water line. The lake level looked normal, not especially high, not especially low. Seasonal drop happens in October. Everyone who fishes up there knows that, but this looked within range. I unloaded the kayak and pushed it into the water without trouble. The mud near the edge was firm enough to stand on. Before launching, I noticed something on one of the trees about 15 feet from the ramp. A game camera, strapped at chest height with a thick black band. I walked over and looked at it briefly. Standard trail cam, camouflage casing, small lens, infrared array around it. It was angled slightly downward, toward the ramp, not toward the forest, not toward a game trail, toward the water access. I assumed it belonged to a bow hunter. It was that time of year. Some people monitor movement near lakes where deer cross at night. Still, it felt oddly positioned. I stood in front of it for a moment. The tiny red indicator blinked once, recording. I stepped aside. The light went dark again. I told myself it wasn't about me. Then I launched the kayak and pushed off. The lake stretched out wider than it looked from shore, low tree line wrapping around both sides. No houses visible, no docks across the water. I paddled for maybe an hour, not far, just along the edge, checking the shallows, letting the quiet settle in. As the sun dropped, the temperature followed quickly. Minnesota evenings in late fall don't linger. I headed back toward the ramp just as the sky shifted from orange to gray. From the water, I could see the campsite clearing. My truck parked alone, the trailer empty, and the tree with the camera mounted on it. The camera was no longer angled downward. It was pointed directly at the water line where my kayak would land. I slowed my paddling without meaning to. Maybe I had misremembered the angle. Maybe I hadn't paid attention earlier, but I was almost certain it hadn't been pointed that low before. I approached the ramp carefully and let the kayak nose into the gravel. When I stepped out, my boots sank slightly into the mud, not deep, just enough to feel soft under the surface. I pulled the kayak up onto shore and turned to look at the tree. The camera lens was centered on the exact spot where I had emerged from the water. The red light blinked once, then went dark. No one else was there. No additional vehicles had appeared. No engine noise in the distance. Just the lake behind me and the forest around me. I stood there longer than necessary, trying to remember the original angle, trying to convince myself it hadn't changed. The wind didn't pick up. Nothing shifted in the branches. The camera remained steady, watching the ramp. I carried the kayak up toward the campsite and left it resting beside the trailer. As the last light faded, I glanced one more time toward the tree. The lens was still facing the water, still aimed where I had been. And for the first time that evening, I considered the possibility that the lake wasn't the only thing being observed. I woke up just after sunrise. The temperature had dropped more than I expected. Thin frost along the edge of the trailer, my breath visible in the air. The lake looked different. It took me a moment to understand why. From my campsite, the waterline seemed farther away, not dramatically, just enough to make the shoreline look stretched. I stepped closer to the ramp. The gravel slope that had been half submerged the night before was now fully exposed. Dark, wet stones, fading into a wide band of soft mud. My kayak was no longer floating near the edge where I'd left it. It was resting at an angle, several feet out, its bow sunk into shallow muck. I stopped walking. The lake hadn't drained overnight. Not like that. Water levels can fluctuate, sure. Wind can push water toward one side. But this wasn't wind. The surface was still. I walked down the ramp carefully. The mud near the former waterline sucked at my boots. Not deep enough to trap me, but heavy. I grabbed the kayak and tried to pull it closer to shore. It didn't slide easily. The mud had settled around the hull overnight, holding it in place. I pulled harder. The stern shifted slightly, then sank another inch. I paused. This wasn't just low water. This was exposed bottom. The lake had dropped enough that the entire lower section of the ramp no longer reached it. I turned slowly and looked out across the surface. The far tree line looked the same. No exposed rocks mid-lake. No sudden islands appearing. Just the edge near the ramp receding. I climbed back up toward the tree with the camera. The angle was unchanged from the night before, still aimed at the ramp, still pointed toward the exposed shoreline. I stood directly in front of it again. The red light blinked. Recording. The small click of its internal shutter sounded louder in the quiet morning. I looked around. No other campers had arrived. No trucks in the lot above the ramp. The gravel turnaround area was empty except for mine. I checked my phone. No signal. I walked back down and tried again to free the kayak. This time I used the tow rope from the trailer. I secured it to the bow handle and stepped back up the ramp. I pulled. The rope tightened. The kayak shifted an inch, then stopped. I pulled again. The rope cut into my gloves. The hull made a low suction sound against the mud. Then nothing. I released tension and stepped closer. The kayak had sunk slightly deeper along its left side. The mud here wasn't just surface sludge. It was dense, heavy. I tried pushing from behind instead of pulling. My boots slid forward half a step. The mud swallowed them to the ankle. I froze. Not because I was trapped, because I understood something simple. If I kept pushing blindly, I could get myself stuck too. I backed up slowly, lifting each foot deliberately. By the time I reached the gravel again, my heart was beating faster than the effort justified. I wiped mud from my gloves and looked toward the tree line across the clearing. The forest was still. No movement between trunks, no figures watching from the edge. But the camera was active. It hadn't been moved. It hadn't been removed. It had recorded my arrival, recorded my launch, recorded my return. And now it was recording me trying to extract myself from a ramp that no longer worked. I walked closer to the tree and studied the casing. There was a small antenna protruding from the top, not standard on every model. This one wasn't just storing footage, it was transmitting. I stepped back slowly. The ramp was unusable. The kayak was stuck. The trailer couldn't back any farther down without sinking into mud itself. And there was only one road out, the same one I had driven in on yesterday. Clear, empty, and the only connection between me and the rest of the world. I looked at the lake again. The water line seemed to hold steady now, not rising, not falling further, just stopped, as if whatever adjustment had been made overnight had reached its intended level. I felt something shift inside my chest. Not panic, recognition. This wasn't a random fluctuation. It was timed, and I was still being watched. I tried logic first. Maybe there had been a scheduled water release. Maybe a dam upstream adjusted levels overnight. Lakes in Minnesota aren't all natural basins. Some are controlled, but there had been no rain, no storm warning, no advisory posted at the turnoff. And even if water had been released, it wouldn't only affect one corner of the shoreline like that. I walked along the edge of the lake, boots sinking slightly into the soft ground. The exposed band of mud extended maybe 15 yards on either side of the ramp. Beyond that, the shoreline looked mostly unchanged. It wasn't the entire lake. It was this section, this access point. I stopped about 20 yards from the ramp and looked back. From this angle, I could see the tree with the camera clearly. It hadn't been moved. But the lens was angled slightly downward now, lower than before, centered directly on the stranded kayak. The red indicator blinked once. I felt heat rise in my face despite the cold air. I walked back toward the tree. The strap holding the camera was tight. No slack, no sign it had slipped naturally. I reached up and touched the casing. It was cool from the morning air. I considered taking it down, just unstrapping it and tossing it into the lake. But that would mean touching something that didn't belong to me, destroying property, escalating a situation I didn't fully understand. Instead, I crouched and examined the ground near the base of the tree. There were footprints, not mine. These were deeper, wider. They led from the road behind the campsite toward the tree, then toward the ramp, then back again. Measured, unhurried. I followed them a few steps toward the tree line. They disappeared into harder soil where the underbrush thickened. I straightened and looked toward the gravel lot above the ramp. Still empty. No vehicles had arrived. No engine noise in the distance. The nearest town was far enough away that random morning traffic wasn't a factor. Whoever owned that camera had come in on foot, or had been here before I arrived. I went back to the kayak and tried again with the tow rope. This time I anchored the rope to the trailer hitch and eased the truck forward slowly. The tires rolled carefully over gravel. The rope tightened. The kayak shifted a few inches, then stopped. The rear tires began to slide. I stopped immediately. If the truck lost traction and slid toward the mud, I'd be dealing with more than just a stuck kayak. I stepped out and inspected the rope. The line was cutting deeper into the mud near the bow. The kayak had settled further overnight than I realized. I removed the rope and stood there breathing slowly. I checked my phone again. No signal. I walked up the gravel drive toward the road. Maybe I could drive out, get service, and call someone with equipment, leave the kayak temporarily. That idea lingered longer than I expected. I reached the top of the small incline, where the ramp met the main gravel access road. The road was clear, open, no obstruction. I looked down at the tire tracks from yesterday. Mine were the only ones. Then I noticed something else. A faint second set, not deep enough to be obvious at first glance, but parallel to mine for about 10 feet before veering off toward the trees. A vehicle had been here, lightweight, maybe an ATV, maybe a small side-by-side. It hadn't been there when I arrived. I would have noticed fresh overlapping tracks. These were recent. The edges were sharp, not softened by wind or dew. I felt that same tightness in my chest again. This wasn't random water behavior. It wasn't an abandoned hunting camera forgotten in the woods. Someone had driven in, after me, without announcing themselves. I turned back toward the lake. The camera was still aimed at the ramp, still recording. I imagined someone watching a live feed, waiting to see if I abandoned the kayak, waiting to see if I left the site unattended, testing what I would prioritize, property or mobility. The thought settled hard. If I left with the truck and came back later, I might find the kayak gone, or worse. If I stayed, I remained predictable, confined to the same small strip of gravel and mud. I walked back down toward the stranded kayak one more time. The mud had dried slightly on the surface, but remained soft underneath. I stepped carefully and looked at the water line. It had not risen, not even an inch. The level was steady, artificially steady. I glanced back at the road again. It was still open, still usable. But for the first time since arriving, I realized something simple. Even if I drove away, I might not be able to get back in the same way. And whoever adjusted the lake level, whoever positioned that camera, already knew I was here, already knew I was stuck. I made the decision around 10:30 a.m. I was going to leave the kayak, not permanently, just long enough to get cell service and come back with help. It felt practical. It also felt like admitting I had lost control of the situation. I secured the trailer and locked the truck bed. I didn't bother covering the kayak. If someone wanted it, a tarp wouldn't stop them. Before getting into the truck, I looked one more time at the camera. Still aimed at the ramp, still steady. The red light blinked once as I walked past it. I drove slowly up the gravel access road. My tires passed over the faint secondary tracks I had noticed earlier. They were clearer from this angle, narrower than mine, fresh. They merged back into the forest about 20 yards from the lake. No signage marked any trail there. No reason for an ATV to branch off unless the driver knew the terrain. I didn't stop to inspect further. I kept driving. The road out remained clear for nearly 2 miles. Then, at a slight bend where the trees thinned, I saw something that made me slow down. A county sign, temporary, mounted on 2 thin metal posts. Water level advisory. Access may be limited. The date on the bottom was handwritten, today's date. The ink looked dry. The gravel around the sign was freshly disturbed, as if it had been hammered in within the last few hours. I stared at it through the windshield. The lake had been adjusted, intentionally, and the notice had been placed after I arrived. I drove the remaining stretch to the highway and pulled over once I had 2 bars of service. I called the DNR office listed on the original sign. After 3 transfers, I reached someone who confirmed there had been a scheduled adjustment for water control that morning. Was it posted online? I asked. It should have been, she said. It wasn't at the lake. There was a pause. Well, sometimes signage goes up the day of. Day of. I hung up and sat there for a minute. The drone. The camera repositioned overnight. The fresh footprints. The ATV tracks. The advisory sign installed after I left. Everything was explainable, individually, but not sequentially. I drove back. The temporary sign was still there. The road back to the lake was quiet. When I reached the clearing, the first thing I noticed was the water. It had risen. Not dramatically, but enough. The exposed mud band had shrunk by several feet. The kayak was floating again, lightly rocking near the edge of the ramp. The camera was gone. The strap mark remained on the bark, but the device itself was no longer there. I stepped out of the truck and stood still, scanning the perimeter. No vehicles, no figures in the trees, no sound beyond the low ripple of water against gravel. I walked down the ramp slowly. The mud that had trapped the kayak was still thick, but now submerged just enough to release it. I pulled the kayak toward me without resistance, as if it had never been stuck. I loaded it onto the trailer carefully, checked the area once more. Nothing left behind. No additional tracks, no equipment. Just the faint indent in the bark where the camera had been strapped. I drove out without delay. When I reached the highway again, I checked my rearview mirror out of habit. Nothing followed. 2 weeks later, I was browsing a local outdoor forum. A post caught my eye. Dry launch camper, October 22nd. There was a short video attached. Grainy footage from a trail camera. It showed me standing at the edge of the ramp, pulling uselessly at the kayak, stepping back, looking around. The timestamp matched that morning exactly. The clip ended just as I turned toward the road to consider leaving. There was no audio, no comments explaining the water release, just a caption under the video. Interesting timing. The account that posted it had no history, no replies, no additional uploads. The video was taken down by the next day. I saved the clip before it disappeared. I've watched it more times than I should. The camera angle in the footage is slightly different from what I remember. Higher, farther back, as if there had been more than one device. And in the top corner of the frame, just barely visible between two trees, there is a second shadow. Not mine, not the kayak. Something standing still, watching the ramp, watching me realize. I never went back to that lake, and I never launched from a quiet gravel ramp without checking the trees first. I always take a picture of the trail map before I start hiking. It's not because I don't trust my sense of direction. It's because I don't trust cell service. This was a national forest trailhead in Colorado, about 30 minutes off the highway. The last 10 miles were dirt road, washboarded and narrow enough that you had to slow for oncoming trucks. When I pulled into the parking area around 5:10 p.m., there were no other vehicles. Just a wooden information board, a metal bear warning sign, and a faded U.S. Forest Service logo nailed to one corner. The trail was called Pine Hollow Loop. 6 miles, moderate elevation gain. Estimated time, 3 to 4 hours. That's what the board said. I remember it clearly because 6 miles is my comfort distance. Long enough to feel like effort, short enough to finish before dark without rushing. I stepped closer to the board and read the details. Trailhead elevation, 8,200 feet. Summit ridge, 8,940 feet. Water crossing at mile 2.1. I took out my phone and snapped 2 photos. One of the full map, one of the legend showing distances. The board was simple, beige background, black lines for the loop, mile markers printed in small bold numbers along the route. 6.0 miles total. I zoomed in on the image afterward, just to make sure it was legible. It was. Satisfied, I walked back to my truck. I wasn't planning to hike that evening, just scout the first quarter mile and camp nearby. The parking lot allowed overnight vehicles as long as you weren't blocking access. I drove a short distance down a side spur and found a flat patch near the tree line. No fire ring, just open dirt and pine needles. From there, I could still see the parking area through the trees. No one arrived before sunset. The quiet felt normal. Not heavy, not tense, just mountain quiet. Around 7 p.m., I walked the first stretch of the trail to get a sense of it. The path was clear, packed dirt. Occasional roots crossing at ankle height. Mile marker posts were spaced roughly every half mile. The first marker read 0.5 miles. The second read 1.0, consistent with the board. I turned back after about 15 minutes and returned to my campsite. By the time I finished eating, the temperature had dropped sharply. The kind of cold that settles into your jacket sleeves and stays there. From my truck, I could see the information board, faintly illuminated by moonlight filtering through branches. It looked unchanged, still, anchored. I remember glancing at it one more time before going inside. The loop on the map was simple, almost symmetrical. 6 miles, moderate, predictable. I set my alarm for 6:30 a.m. The plan was straightforward. Wake up, break camp, hike the full loop, be back at the truck before early afternoon. No rush, no uncertainty. At least, that was the idea. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke briefly, not because of a noise, because of light. A thin beam moving between the trees. Not strong enough to flood the area, just enough to trace a narrow line along the trunks parallel to the trail. I stayed still and watched it for a few seconds. The beam didn't swing wildly like someone searching. It moved steadily, in a straight path, then stopped, as if whoever held it had paused. I waited for footsteps, for conversation, for the crunch of gravel in the parking lot. Nothing came. The beam went dark, and the forest returned to its usual shape. I told myself it was another hiker doing a late start or an early summit attempt. That happens. People move through these trails at odd hours. By morning, the light was gone. The air was clear, and the information board looked the same from a distance, until I walked closer. The beige background was unchanged. The lines of the loop were identical, but the number printed near the bottom had shifted. It didn't say 6.0 miles anymore. It said 8.4. I stood there staring at it. The font was the same, the ink tone identical. Nothing looked freshly painted or scratched out, just a different number, 8.4 miles total. I took out my phone, opened the photo from the evening before, and zoomed in on the same corner of the map, 6.0 miles. I looked up at the board again, 8.4, down at my phone, 6.0, back up at the board, 8.4. No additional cars had arrived overnight, no fresh tire tracks in the lot. The mile markers on the trail hadn't changed when I walked it yesterday evening, at least not the first two. I stepped back slowly. The board didn't look altered. It didn't look vandalized. It didn't look new. It just disagreed with what I remembered, and with what my phone was still showing. I stood there longer than I should have, long enough for the quiet to feel slightly misaligned. Then I told myself something simple. One of them had to be wrong, and the only way to know which one was to start walking. I started the trail at 7:02 a.m. The air was thin but clean. No wind, no other hikers in sight. The first mile marker appeared sooner than I expected. 0.7 miles. I stopped. Yesterday evening, the first marker had read 0.5. I told myself I might have misremembered. Maybe I hadn't walked far enough to see the first true post. I continued. The next marker came after what felt like another half mile, 2.7 miles. I stood there longer than necessary. If the loop was 6 miles, 2.7 made sense at this stage. If the loop was 8.4 miles, it also made sense. That was the problem. Both versions could fit. I pulled out my phone and opened the photo again. 6.0 miles total. The legend was clear, the small printed number near the bottom left corner of the board. I zoomed in until the pixels blurred. 6.0. I looked up at the trail marker in front of me. 2.7. The wood looked weathered, not freshly replaced, but something about the screw heads caught my eye. They were bright, shiny against the dull wood, recently tightened. I stepped closer and ran my thumb lightly along the edge of the post. No dust had settled along the seam where it met the ground, as if it had been reseeded recently. I kept walking. The trail narrowed slightly as it climbed, pine needles thick underfoot, occasional exposed roots. At mile marker 3.1, I stopped again. It had been less than a quarter mile since the last marker. That wasn't consistent. I checked my watch. The time felt normal. The incline felt gradual, but the distances were no longer predictable. I tried opening all trails. No signal. The map wouldn't load offline because I hadn't downloaded this particular trail. I looked back down the path I had just walked. It looked ordinary, curved gently out of sight. No branching forks, no detours, just a single defined line through the trees. Then I saw it, a faint flicker between trunks to my right, low at first, then rising slightly. A narrow beam of light, white, focused, moving parallel to the trail. I stopped walking. The beam stopped too. I waited. Nothing. No footsteps in brush, no branch snapping, just the sense of presence aligned with me. I took 3 slow steps forward. The light moved forward the same distance, not crossing the trail, not approaching, maintaining a steady lateral position, about 20 feet off the path, hidden enough that I couldn't see the source, just the effect. I felt my breathing change, slower, controlled. I didn't call out, didn't wave. If it was another hiker, they would have acknowledged me. This didn't feel like acknowledgement. It felt like calibration. I resumed walking at a steady pace. The beam remained, visible for a few seconds, then gone. I told myself it could have been sun reflection through branches, but the sky above was clear blue. No angle would create a moving beam at that height. At mile marker 4.9, I stopped again. If the loop was 6 miles, I should have been close to completing it. If it was 8.4, I was only halfway. The sign looked older than the others. The woods slightly darker, the numbers carved deeper. I turned slowly in a full circle. No sound, no voices. The forest was symmetrical in all directions, and that was when it occurred to me. If the board at the trailhead had changed overnight, if the mile markers were being adjusted, then the loop might not be a loop anymore. It might be something else. I listened carefully, for wind, for movement, for the faint mechanical buzz of something airborne. Nothing. But the quiet felt deliberate, and I was no longer certain how far I had walked, or how far I still had to go. I decided to turn around at mile marker 5.2. If the loop was 6 miles, I should have been close to descending back toward the trailhead by now. If it was 8.4, I was committing to something longer than planned. Either way, continuing forward felt like surrendering control. So I pivoted and started walking back the way I came. The path behind me looked identical to the one ahead. Same width, same pine needle cover, same slight incline. After 10 minutes of steady downhill walking, I expected to see the 4.9 marker again. Instead, the next post read 6.1. I stopped immediately. I hadn't passed 6.1 before, not in either direction. I checked my watch. The time made sense. I hadn't walked far enough to justify that jump. I scanned the base of the post. The screws were bright, cleaner than the surrounding wood, recently handled. My pulse ticked upward. I turned around again and walked in the opposite direction. If I had misread something, the numbers would correct themselves. After several minutes, another marker came into view, 3.8. I stared at it. That didn't align with anything. The spacing between posts had changed. The order had changed. The logic had collapsed. I stepped off the trail slightly to look at the forest floor beside it. No secondary paths, no hidden forks, no obvious diversions. The trail itself hadn't branched, only the distances had. A faint light flickered again between the trees to my left, closer this time. Not enough to illuminate the ground, just enough to signal presence. I froze. The beam froze too. We remained that way for several seconds. Then I took one deliberate step toward the trees. The light withdrew deeper into the forest. Not fleeing in panic, just adjusting its position, maintaining the lateral gap, about 20 feet, always 20 feet. I felt something settle in my mind then. This wasn't random signage vandalism. This wasn't faulty memory. Someone was adjusting the frame of reference, not blocking the trail physically, just altering the perception of distance. If I believed I had walked farther than I had, I might push too hard. If I believed I had walked less, I might keep going longer than intended. Containment didn't require walls. It required uncertainty. I took out my phone again and opened the photo of the board. The image was still there, 6.0 miles. I zoomed in further. The numbers blurred. I closed the image and reopened it. The resolution sharpened again, but something had shifted. The legend text now looked slightly different. The small number near the bottom left corner. I blinked. It read 8.4. I zoomed out quickly. No glitch, no distortion. 8.4 miles total. The same font as the board this morning. My throat tightened. The photo had changed, or my memory had. Either possibility was worse than the other. I lowered the phone slowly and looked back down the trail. No markers visible in either direction, just the narrow corridor of trees and the quiet. Then the light appeared again, ahead of me now, centered directly on the path, not hidden in the trees, not parallel, blocking the way without physically occupying it. It didn't move toward me. It didn't retreat. It just remained there, steady, as if waiting for me to choose a direction. I stood there, breathing carefully. The forest around me remained unchanged, but the geometry of the trail no longer belonged to me. And for the first time since arriving, I understood something clearly. Even if I reached the parking lot, I wouldn't know how I got there. I didn't chase the light. I stepped off the trail instead. Not far, just enough to break the invisible line between us. The beam didn't follow immediately. It stayed fixed on the path for several seconds. Then it shifted slightly, recentering, adjusting, like it had lost its reference point. I moved farther into the trees, careful not to lose sight of the trail itself. The forest floor was uneven but navigable. No hidden cliffs, no sudden drops. After maybe 30 steps, the light disappeared entirely. No retreating flicker, no sweeping arc, just gone. I waited. Nothing returned. When I stepped back onto the trail, the corridor felt subtly narrower, or maybe I was just more aware of it. I chose a direction at random and walked with steady pace, not rushing, not hesitating. If the distances were being manipulated, then numbers no longer mattered. Only landmarks did. A fallen log shaped like a forked Y, a rock outcrop with white lichen, a tree with bark stripped halfway up. I started counting minutes instead of miles. 10 minutes forward, no marker. 20 minutes, still none. Then the trees thinned. The parking lot came into view. My truck was the only vehicle there. The information board stood exactly where it had been, untouched. I walked straight to it. The map displayed 6.0 miles, not 8.4. The font was the same as yesterday evening. The screws on the frame looked older, duller, as if they had never been disturbed. I pulled out my phone, opened the photo. 8.4 miles, clear as daylight. I zoomed in again. 8.4. I looked up at the board. 6.0. Back to my phone. 8.4. Neither image flickered, neither shifted. They simply disagreed. I stepped back slowly and scanned the tree line around the parking area. No flashlight, no movement, no parked ATVs, no additional footprints in the dirt, just my truck and the quiet. I loaded my gear without rushing. The distance I had walked no longer felt measurable. I couldn't tell if I had completed a 6-mile loop or something longer. My legs felt moderately tired, but not 8-mile tired. That detail stayed with me. When I drove down the dirt road toward the highway, I checked my rearview mirror repeatedly. No headlights followed. No dust plume behind me except my own. Back home that evening, I opened all trails and searched for Pine Hollow Loop. The listed distance was 8.4 miles. Elevation gain identical to the board. Recent reviews referenced the longer loop and advised bringing extra water. I scrolled back months. Every archived version showed 8.4 miles. There was no record of it ever being 6. I opened the metadata on the photo I had taken the evening before. Timestamp matched. Location matched. The image clearly displayed 6.0 miles. I enlarged it further. The number didn't look edited. No blur, no pixel inconsistency. Just a clean printed 6.0. 2 days later, I checked the listing again. Still 8.4. I considered driving back to confirm in person, but something stopped me. Not fear, not exactly, just an understanding. If the distance could change without moving the trees, if the markers could reorder without branching the path, then the loop itself was secondary. What mattered was calibration. Someone had measured how far I was willing to walk before questioning the system, how long I would trust signage over instinct, how easily a number could redirect momentum. The flashlight hadn't chased me. It had maintained position, always parallel, always 20 feet away, not guiding, not threatening, just observing adjustment. I never returned to Pine Hollow, and I don't take photos of trail maps anymore, because if the numbers can change overnight, it's not the miles you should be worried about. It's the fact that someone needed to know how many you would accept. I try not to run a generator after dark, not because I'm trying to be polite, because sound travels too far in open desert. This campground was on BLM land in southern Utah, not a formal park, just a loop of dirt sites with metal fire rings and a single rules board at the entrance. Quiet hours, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. No amplified music. Pack it in, pack it out. There was no host, no ranger station, no gate, just distance. I arrived around 4:40 p.m., late enough that the sun was already dropping behind the mesas. The sky looked clean and empty, the kind of blue that makes you underestimate how cold it gets at night. Only one other rig was in the loop, a travel trailer parked far down near the last sites. No lights on, no one outside. I chose a spot closer to the entrance, partly because it gave me an easy exit, and partly because I liked being able to see the approach road. My setup was simple, a small Class B camper van, solar on the roof, a portable generator and a locked storage box on the rear rack. I didn't need the generator often, but late fall nights chew through batteries fast. Heater fan, lights, phone, small appliances, so I ran it for an hour while I cooked. The engine started clean, a steady mechanical purr, no sputter, no misfire. I kept the volume low inside the van, but outside it still sounded like a tiny lawnmower trying to breathe. At 6:30 p.m., I walked over to the rules board again, just to make sure I wasn't missing anything. Quiet hours were clearly printed. 10 p.m. I made a mental note to shut everything down early. By 7:15 p.m., the temperature dropped enough that I could see a thin sheen of moisture on the windows. The desert does that thing where the air stays dry, but the cold feels sharp, almost metallic. I ate inside, no fire. Wind wasn't strong, but I didn't feel like advertising myself with light and flame. Around 9:40 p.m., I stepped outside to shut the generator down. The other trailer down the loop was still dark. No porch light, no silhouettes, no movement, just a parked shape under starlight. I unlocked the storage box, reached in, and flipped the generator switch to off. The engine died immediately. Silence poured into the campground like it had been waiting. For a moment, it felt good. Quiet hours respected, no attention drawn. No reason for anyone to notice me. I closed the box and went back inside. I brushed my teeth, checked the battery monitor. It read 72%. Fine. I set my phone on the counter and plugged it in. The charging icon appeared, slow but steady. At 10:05 p.m., I turned the interior light off and lay down. The van settled with soft creaks as it cooled. I was almost asleep when I heard it, a faint mechanical click. Not inside the van, outside. I opened my eyes. Another click. Then a low rumble, muffled at first, as if the sound were pushing through something sealed. I sat up and listened. The rumble grew into a familiar, steady purr. The generator. I didn't move for several seconds, waiting for it to stop. It didn't. The sound stabilized into a full idle, the same tone it had earlier. I checked my watch. 10:17 p.m. Quiet hours had been in effect for 17 minutes, and the generator I had switched off with my own hand was running again. I grabbed my flashlight and moved to the door. Before I opened it, I paused, not because I expected someone to be standing outside, because I didn't understand how this could happen without someone touching it. I opened the door and stepped into the cold. The generator sound was real, coming from the rear rack, steady, confident, as if it had never been shut down at all. I walked toward it slowly, breath visible in the dark, and as I reached the storage box, I noticed something else. A small light out beyond my sight, near the edge of the brush. Not a headlamp, not a lantern, just a pin-sized glow. Low to the ground, holding still, watching the loop, watching me. And the generator kept running. I stood there for a full 5 seconds before touching anything. The generator wasn't sputtering. It wasn't struggling to turn over like a faulty restart. It was running clean. Steady RPM. No choke engaged. No hesitation. Exactly how it had sounded earlier in the evening. I unlocked the storage box fully and crouched down. The switch was in the on position. I stared at it. I had flipped it down myself. I remembered the resistance of the toggle, the slight vibration when the engine died. Now it sat upright, active. I reached in and switched it off again. The engine cut instantly. Silence dropped hard and fast. I stayed crouched, watching it as if it might argue with me. Nothing happened. I closed the lid but didn't lock it this time. Then I looked toward the brush again. The small light was still there, low, steady, no flicker. About 40 feet from my sight, just beyond the edge where gravel turned to desert scrub. Not moving toward me, not retreating, just present. I took a step sideways to test something. The light didn't track me. It didn't adjust its angle. It remained fixed in that same position, like a distant LED placed carefully at knee height. I lifted my flashlight and aimed it toward the glow. The beam washed over sagebrush and uneven ground. No person, no reflective eye shine from an animal, no visible device. When I lowered my flashlight, the small glow returned, unchanged. I felt the first thin line of unease settle into my spine. If it were a camper with a headlamp, they would shift weight, turn, adjust. This did none of that. I walked back toward the van slowly. The other trailer down the loop was still dark, completely silent. If they were awake, they weren't reacting to the generator restarting. That detail bothered me more than the generator itself. I stepped inside and checked the battery monitor again. 72%, unchanged. The heater fan hummed lightly. Everything felt normal. I turned off the interior light and waited. 10 minutes passed. No sound, no movement. I lay down again, this time not fully closing my eyes. At 10:48 p.m., the click came again, louder this time, followed by the same low rumble building into full idle. I sat upright immediately. I hadn't touched anything. The storage box was closed. The generator had restarted on its own. The sound carried across the campground, mechanical and sharp against the cold desert air. I grabbed my jacket and stepped outside again. The glow in the brush was gone. For a brief second, I felt relief. Then I noticed something else. A second light, farther back, higher this time, maybe 5 feet off the ground. Dimmer than the first, but visible once my eyes adjusted. The generator continued running. I walked straight to it and flipped the switch off again. The engine cut clean. As soon as it died, the light in the brush disappeared. Not faded, not dimmed, gone. I stood there in complete darkness, except for starlight. My breathing sounded too loud. I turned slowly in a full circle. No crunch of footsteps. No engine from the other trailer. No movement on the access road. I waited 30 seconds, then a minute. Nothing. I stepped back inside and locked the van. This time, I unplugged the extension cord entirely and coiled it onto the floor. If it restarted again, it wouldn't be feeding anything. The battery monitor still read 71% now. 1% drop. Expected. I lay back down but didn't attempt sleep. At 11:12 p.m., the rumble started again. There was no click this time, just immediate ignition, full idle, as if someone had pulled the starter cord directly. My heart thudded once against my ribs. I moved to the rear window and pulled the curtain aside just enough to see the storage box. The lid vibrated slightly from engine motion. No one standing there. No visible hands. Just mechanical persistence. Then, beyond it, the glow returned. Closer now, maybe 30 feet, low again, steady. And when the generator ran, the light held position. When I killed it, the light vanished. I tested it deliberately. Switch off. Silence. Darkness in the brush. Switch on. Engine rumble. Light appears. Switch off. Darkness. Switch on again. The glow reappeared immediately. Same location, same height, like a synchronized response. I stood there in the cold desert air, hands still on the generator casing. It wasn't random malfunction. It wasn't faulty wiring. It was reactive. Something out there was waiting for sound, or power, or signal, and it was answering it. The other trailer remained dark the entire time, as if none of this concerned them, as if I was the only one inside the loop who mattered. The temperature had dropped below freezing by then. The heater inside would drain the battery before morning if I didn't recharge. I faced a simple equation. Let the generator run and announce myself to whatever was out there, or turn it off and sit in the cold. Either way, the response would come, and I was beginning to understand that the generator wasn't the problem. It was the trigger. At 11:38 p.m., I decided to remove the problem entirely. If the generator was reacting to something mechanical, I would eliminate the mechanical variable. I shut it off again and let the engine cool for a minute. Then I opened the storage box fully and pulled the unit out onto the gravel. The desert air felt thinner now, colder. I disconnected the fuel line, unscrewed the spark plug cap, detached the battery lead, one by one, methodical. I wasn't rushing. I wanted to be certain. When I was done, the generator was inert. It couldn't restart without fuel and ignition. I stepped back and looked toward the brush. No light, no glow, nothing visible between the low shrubs and twisted branches. I returned inside the van and locked the doors. Battery monitor read 69%, lower but manageable if I rationed heat. I turned the heater fan to its lowest setting and shut off every unnecessary light. Then I waited. Silence held for nearly 20 minutes. The kind of silence that makes you question your own memory. Maybe I had imagined the synchronization. Maybe the glow had been distant traffic, refracted through terrain. Maybe the restart had been an electrical fault. At 12:01 a.m., the interior cabin lights flickered. Once, then twice. I froze. The battery monitor on the wall blinked. The percentage ticked upward. 69, 70, 71. I stared at it. The generator outside was dismantled, disconnected. No fuel line, no spark plug, and yet the voltage reading was rising. The heater fan increased in pitch slightly, as if drawing from a fuller source. I moved slowly toward the rear window and lifted the curtain. The generator remained dark and silent on the gravel. No vibration, no exhaust, nothing. Then, from the corner of my vision, I saw it again. The glow in the brush, closer this time. Maybe 20 feet from the van, higher off the ground, almost level with my waist, steady. The cabin lights flickered again. The battery monitor climbed to 73%. The glow brightened slightly in response. Not dramatically, just enough to register. I reached for the main power cutoff inside the van and flipped it down. The cabin lights went dark instantly. The heater fans stopped. The battery monitor screen went blank, complete internal blackout. Outside, the glow vanished. No fade, no dimming, just absence. My breathing sounded loud in the sudden silence. I waited 5 seconds, 10. Nothing returned. I flipped the power cutoff back up. The cabin lights came on weakly. Battery monitor flashed. 72%, not 73. As if something had been borrowing and returning charge in real time. The glow reappeared, closer still, not advancing rapidly, just recalibrating its position, maintaining distance, not approaching the van, not retreating into darkness, responding. I understood then. It wasn't reacting to engine noise. It wasn't reacting to fuel ignition. It was reacting to power flow, to energy transfer, to active draw. I stepped out of the van carefully. The desert cold cut through my jacket instantly. The generator lay open and disassembled on the gravel. Useless. The glow hovered in the brush, steady and quiet. I took a step toward it. It did not retreat. I took another. It remained in place. 20 feet between us, unchanging. Not aggressive, not timid, observational. I stopped walking. The ground between us was flat and empty. No silhouette visible behind the glow. No reflective eyes. No device casing catching starlight. Just the point of illumination itself. I spoke once. "Who's there?" My voice carried lightly over gravel and sage. No reply. The glow held steady. Then, behind me, inside the van, the cabin light flickered again, without the cutoff being touched. I turned sharply. Through the side window, I could see faint interior illumination returning. Battery monitor back online. Percentage climbing again. I hadn't touched anything. The generator remained dismantled on the ground. The glow did not move. It simply remained present while the van drew power from nowhere I could identify. Containment no longer meant being stuck physically. It meant dependency. If I shut everything down, the glow disappeared. If I allowed power to flow, it returned. And each time it returned, it came slightly closer. Not enough to threaten, just enough to measure response. I walked backward toward the van slowly. The glow maintained distance, never closing the gap beyond 20 feet, never falling farther behind, always parallel to my adjustments. And for the first time that night, I considered a possibility that felt worse than malfunction. This wasn't about noise, or camping etiquette, or generator mechanics. It was about signal, and something out there was synchronizing with mine. At 1:47 a.m., I stopped experimenting. The pattern was clear. Power on, light appears. Power off, light disappears. Each cycle brought it slightly closer, not dramatically, not in a way that would trigger instinctive panic, just incremental, measured. I could stay in the dark and let the temperature drop below freezing inside the van. Or I could run power and continue the exchange. Neither option felt stable, so I chose a third one. I was leaving. I stepped outside one last time and looked directly at the glow. It hovered in the same place, waist height, unmoving. The generator lay dismantled at my feet. I didn't bother reassembling it. I climbed into the driver's seat and turned the ignition. The van started clean. Dashboard lights came on. Battery indicator showed full charge. Full. That was impossible. An hour earlier, it had been under 70%. Now it read 100. I didn't question it. I shifted into drive. As the headlights cut across the brush, the glow vanished instantly. Not dimmed, not retreated. Gone. I rolled slowly toward the access road. In the side mirror, I saw the second trailer at the far end of the loop. Still dark, still silent, no porch light, no movement. I reached the dirt road and accelerated gently. The van felt normal. No warning lights, no error codes, no flickering interior systems. After half a mile, I glanced at the battery indicator again. Still full. I drove all the way to the highway without seeing another vehicle. When I finally stopped at a gas station 20 miles away, I stepped out and opened the rear doors. The generator was exactly as I had left it. Fuel line disconnected, spark plug removed, no sign of tampering. The next morning, in daylight, I tested it at home, reconnected everything, pulled the starter cord. It ran perfectly. No unexpected ignition, no self-start, no electrical anomalies. The battery monitor in the van behaved normally too, charging only when connected to shore power or the generator. No phantom increases. I told myself it had been some obscure electrical feedback loop, maybe a wiring fault I couldn't reproduce, maybe a misreading in low temperature. But 2 weeks later, while scrolling through a Utah camping forum, I saw a post from someone who had camped near mile marker 42 on that same BLM road. The title read, "Anyone else notice lights responding to generators?" The post was short. He described a small glow in the brush that appeared whenever his generator ran. He said it vanished when he shut it off. He thought it was someone monitoring noise violations. He didn't stay long enough to test it further. There were no replies, no follow-up. The account had been created that same day. No other posts before or after. I checked the timestamp. It matched the night I had been there, within the same 2-hour window. I closed the forum and didn't reopen it. I haven't camped on BLM land since without scanning the brush line first. Not for animals, not for other campers, for calibration. Because whatever was out there that night, it wasn't trying to scare me. It wasn't trying to approach. It was measuring. Testing how long I would tolerate dependency, How many cycles I would run before choosing darkness over signal. And when I finally drove away, the glow didn't follow, which told me something simple. It never needed to. It only needed to know how much power I was willing to give it. I chose that state park because it had cell service. Not strong service, just enough that my reservation confirmation email came through without me having to drive back toward the highway. It was early spring in northern Arizona. Cold nights, clear mornings, the kind of weather that makes you believe you're alone, even when you're not. The campground wasn't remote wilderness. It was structured, marked sites, numbered posts, a self-check kiosk at the entrance, a metal barrier arm that lifted when your license plate was recognized. My reservation was for 2 nights. Check-in, 2 p.m. Checkout, 11 a.m. I remember that time clearly because I prefer late checkouts. It lets me drink coffee slowly instead of packing in a rush. When I arrived Friday afternoon, I pulled up to the kiosk and typed in my last name. The small screen flickered, then displayed my site number and departure time. 11 a.m. Sunday. A thin receipt printed from the slot below. I tore it off and read it again before sliding it onto the dashboard. Site 27. Departure, 11 a.m. The barrier arm lifted smoothly. Inside, the campground was half full. A mix of travel trailers, a few tents, and one older Class A motorhome parked near the bathhouse. I backed into Site 27 without trouble. Gravel pad, fire ring, picnic table, a short metal post with the number bolted on. Nothing unusual. Around 6 p.m., a white Ranger truck rolled slowly through the loop. No siren, no spotlight, just a quiet pass-by. The driver didn't stop, didn't wave, just drove through, scanning sites the way people scan grocery shelves. It didn't feel threatening, just routine. That night was uneventful. No loud music, no arguments, no generators after quiet hours. At 10 p.m. sharp, the campground settled into a kind of regulated silence. Not wilderness quiet, structured quiet. I slept well. Saturday passed normally. A short hike, coffee at the picnic table, watching other campers come and go. I noticed something small though. Most people seemed to start packing earlier than I expected. By 8:30 a.m., 2 of the neighboring sites were already halfway broken down. Hoses coiled, stabilizers lifted. I assumed they were one-night stays. My departure wasn't until Sunday, no reason to rush. That night, the Ranger truck passed again around 9:45 p.m., slower this time. It paused briefly near the entrance of the loop, then continued on. I glanced at the dashboard receipt before bed, almost out of habit. 11 a.m., still there, still printed in the same thin black ink. Sunday morning I woke up at 7:20. Cold air slipped through the van's window seals. The campground felt different. Not louder, just active. Several sites were already empty. At least 3 rigs that had been there the day before were gone. I stepped outside with a mug of coffee and noticed something at the entrance near the kiosk. A small freestanding sign had been placed beside it. White background, black lettering. Checkout time, 9 a.m. I stood there longer than I should have. 9 a.m. That wasn't what my receipt said. I walked closer to the kiosk, coffee still in hand. The printed rules board mounted beside it listed quiet hours, fire restrictions, and park regulations. At the bottom, in the same bold font as the sign, it read, "Departure time, 9 a.m." I felt a slow, quiet tightening in my chest. That hadn't been there on Friday. It had said 11 o'clock. I was certain. I walked back to the van and picked up the receipt from the dashboard. Site 27, departure, 11 a.m. The ink hadn't faded. The paper hadn't curled. It still read exactly what I remembered. I looked around the loop again. Nearly every remaining camper was in some stage of departure. Hatches open, chairs folded, engines warming. A man from Site 24 walked past carrying a folded camp chair. "You're cutting it close," he said casually. Close to what? I asked. Checkout, he replied. 9 o'clock. I held up the receipt. Mine says 11. He glanced at it quickly. That's weird, he said. It's always been 9. Always. The word lingered longer than it should have. I looked back toward the kiosk again. The Ranger truck was parked near the entrance now, engine off. No one inside that I could see. The freestanding 9 a.m. sign stood upright beside the screen, unbothered by wind, unquestioned by anyone else. I checked my watch. 8:42 a.m. If the real departure time was 9, I had 18 minutes, and I wasn't packed. Said 9 o'clock. Then technically, I already was. Said 9 o'clock. Then technically, I already was. I checked my phone. The reservation confirmation email still read, departure, 11 a.m. Time-stamped Friday at 1:12 p.m. No updates, no follow-up notices, no push notification from the state park system. I stepped back outside. The man from Site 24 was tightening the straps on his truck bed. I walked toward him. Did they change the time recently? I asked. He shrugged. It's been 9 as long as I've been coming here. How long is that? Years. He didn't say it defensively, just casually, as if the idea of it being anything else didn't deserve more thought. I pointed toward the kiosk. That sign wasn't there Friday. He glanced at it and then back at me. It's always there, he said. The word again. Always. I turned slowly and scanned the loop. Engines idling, trailer jacks lifting, doors slamming shut. No one else seemed confused. No one else seemed delayed. The Ranger truck was still parked near the entrance. The driver's door now stood open, but the seat was empty. I checked my watch again. 8:49 a.m. If the departure time was truly 9 o'clock, I had 11 minutes. If it was 11 o'clock, I had over 2 hours. I made a decision that felt socially safe. I started packing. Not because I believed I was wrong, because I didn't want to be the only one not complying. As I folded the camp chair and stowed the propane stove, I kept glancing toward the kiosk. The freestanding 9 a.m. sign did not move. It didn't look temporary. It didn't look hastily placed. It looked settled. At 8:57, the Ranger walked into view from behind the bathhouse. Mid-40s, neutral expression, clipboard in hand. He wasn't rushing. He walked site to site, glancing at license plates. When he reached Site 24, he nodded once at the man I had spoken to earlier. No conversation, just acknowledgement. When he reached my site, he paused, looked at my plate, looked at his clipboard, then looked at me. You heading out? He asked. Yeah, I said. Just packing. He nodded slowly, cutting it close. The exact same phrase the other camper had used. I forced a neutral tone. My receipt says 11. He didn't ask to see it. He didn't challenge me. He simply tilted his head slightly. It's 9, he said. Then he moved on to the next site. No ticket placed on my windshield. No warning issued, just a correction. 9 a.m. came and went while I was still coiling my water hose. Nothing dramatic happened. No loudspeaker announcement, no knock on my door. Just subtle awareness that I was now officially out of compliance with what everyone else seemed to accept as fact. By 9:12 a.m., most of the loop was empty. The Ranger truck remained near the entrance. Engine off, door now closed. I checked my receipt again, 11 a.m., still printed clearly. The ink hadn't shifted. The numbers hadn't blurred. At 9:20, my van was fully packed, everything secured. Stabilizers up, hatch closed. I climbed into the driver's seat and started the engine. No warning lights, no alerts. I drove slowly toward the barrier arm at the entrance. The kiosk screen lit up as I approached. It displayed my site number automatically, Site 27. Below it, a message appeared. Your stay is still active. Departure window begins at 11 a.m. I stared at the screen. Still active. Departure window begins at 11. The barrier arm did not lift. I tapped the screen. No change. I rolled down the window and leaned out slightly, checking for a manual override button. Nothing obvious. I looked toward the Ranger truck. It was parked about 50 yards away, angled so the front faced the kiosk. The Ranger sat inside now, watching, not approaching, not gesturing, just observing. I checked the screen again. Your stay is still active. The departure window begins at 11 a.m. I felt something shift under my ribs. At 9, I had been late. Now, at 9:23, I was early. I put the van in park and shut off the engine. The campground behind me was nearly empty. The only vehicles remaining were mine and the Rangers. And for the first time since seeing the 9 a.m. sign, I understood the containment clearly. I wasn't being forced to leave. I was being forced to wait, on terms that kept changing. I reversed slowly and parked off to the side of the kiosk. The barrier arm remained down. The screen still displayed the same message. Your stay is still active. Departure window begins at 11 a.m. I checked the time. 9:31. If the real checkout was 9, I was now late by 31 minutes. If the system was correct, I was 90 minutes early. I stepped out of the van and walked toward the Ranger truck. He didn't step out. He rolled his window down halfway. "Yes?" he asked calmly. "The screen says I can't leave until 11. He nodded once, like that made perfect sense. "That's your departure time. But the sign says 9. He glanced toward the kiosk sign briefly. "Checkout is 9, he said evenly. "Then why won't it open?" He looked at his clipboard. "System shows you're still active." "For how long?" "Until 11. The words didn't clash in his tone. They coexisted. 9 for compliance, 11 for release. "So I'm late," I said. "For what?" he asked. "Checkout." "It's 9, he replied. "But I can't leave. Your window begins at 11. There was no irritation in his voice, no sarcasm, just a flat presentation of facts that did not align. I waited for him to clarify. He didn't. "You can return to your site," he added. "I've already packed." "That's fine." He rolled the window up. Conversation over. I stood there longer than I should have. The campground loop behind me was empty now. Completely empty. No engines, no footsteps, no doors closing. Just the wind brushing lightly over gravel. I walked back to the van and checked my email again. The reservation confirmation still showed 11 a.m. departure. I refreshed the page. A new message appeared at the top of my inbox. Subject: reservation update. Timestamp: 8:58 a.m. I opened it. Departure time: 9 a.m. The email body stated that due to seasonal adjustments, checkout had been modified. The formatting matched the original confirmation perfectly. Same font, same logo, same header. Only the time was different. 9 a.m. I checked the original email below it. It now read 9 a.m. as well. The timestamp hadn't changed, still Friday at 1:12 p.m. But the departure line no longer said 11. I opened the PDF receipt attached to the confirmation. Departure, 9 a.m. The printed paper on my dashboard still said 11. I held them side by side. Paper, 11. Screen, 9. I felt something tighten at the base of my neck. I wasn't being rushed out. I was being adjusted, retroactively. I looked up at the Ranger truck again. He hadn't moved, still parked at an angle facing the kiosk, watching, not intervening. At 10:02 a.m., I turned the van back on and approached the barrier again. The screen lit up automatically. Site 27. Departure window begins at 11 a.m. The email said 9. The printed receipt said 11. The kiosk screen said 11. The posted sign said 9. The Ranger said 9, but would not let me leave until 11. I tapped the screen again. No change. I put the van in park and turned off the engine. I stepped outside once more and walked back toward my site. Gravel crunched under my boots. The campground felt larger now, emptier, the air colder than it had been at dawn. When I reached Site 27, I noticed something new. The small metal post with the site number had a laminated tag clipped beneath it. Departure, 9 a.m. The ink looked fresh. The edges of the laminate were clean. I crouched and touched it. It was cold, solid, real. That tag had not been there Friday, I was certain. I stood slowly and looked around the empty loop. No one else to confirm or deny. No one else left to contradict what I remembered. The containment wasn't physical, it was administrative. Time itself had been shifted around me, and no matter which version I tried to follow, I was always out of alignment. At 10:47 a.m., I stopped trying to reconcile the versions. The posted signs said 9 a.m. The ranger said 9 a.m. The email now said 9 a.m., but the kiosk would not release me until 11 o'clock. So I waited, not because I agreed, because there was no other option that didn't escalate into something I couldn't define. I sat inside the van with the engine off. No music, no heater, just the quiet of an empty campground. At 10:59 a.m., I started the engine again and rolled toward the barrier. The Ranger truck was still parked in the same place, same angle, same distance from the kiosk, as if it had not moved for over an hour. The kiosk screen lit up. Site 27, departure window active. The barrier arm lifted smoothly. No delay, no hesitation, as if it had simply been waiting for the correct timestamp. I drove forward slowly. As I passed the Ranger truck, I glanced sideways. He was looking straight ahead, not at me, not at the barrier, just forward. When my rear wheels crossed the sensor line beneath the arm, it lowered immediately behind me. I checked the clock on the dashboard. 11:01 a.m. I drove the dirt access road without looking back. When I reached the highway and regained full cell service, I pulled over and checked my reservation history in the State Park app. The stay summary listed: arrival, Friday, 2 p.m. Departure, Saturday, 9 a.m. One night, not two. I scrolled further. The billing section reflected a single night charge. There was no record of Sunday at all. No cancellation, no modification log, no timestamp showing a change request. Just a one-night stay ending at 9 a.m. Saturday. I checked my bank statement. The charge was for one night, not two. The amount matched the updated record. I opened the original confirmation email again. It now showed arrival, Friday, departure, Saturday, 9 a.m. The timestamp still read Friday at 1:12 p.m. No edit history, no indication that anything had been altered. I reached into the glove compartment and pulled out the printed receipt from the kiosk. Site 27, departure, 11 a.m. Sunday. The paper hadn't changed. The ink was still clear. It was the only artifact that contradicted the system. 2 nights later, I checked the campground website again. Checkout time, 9 a.m. It had always been 9 a.m., according to archived versions of the page. I searched online reviews. Several mentioned the strict 9 a.m. departure. None referenced 11 a.m. I never found a screenshot or cached page showing a later time. The only evidence that it had ever been 11 a.m. was the slip of paper in my glove compartment. I went back through my phone photos from that weekend. There was one image of the kiosk screen when I arrived. The resolution wasn't perfect, but when I zoomed in on the departure line, it read 9 a.m., not 11. The date stamp on the photo matched Friday afternoon. I stared at it for a long time. The memory of reading 11 a.m. was vivid. The feeling of choosing that park specifically because of the later departure time was clear. But every digital record now aligned with 9 o'clock. Only the barrier had enforced 11. 9 for compliance, 11 for release. 2 times operating simultaneously. 1 to create pressure, 1 to control exit. I haven't stayed in a state park since without photographing every posted rule and cross-checking it later. Not because I expect signs to change, because I know systems can adjust quietly. And when they do, they don't lock you in with gates or chains. They let you think you're free to leave. Then wait until the correct version of you aligns with their timestamp. And if your memory doesn't match the record wins. I booked that campground 2 weeks in advance. It was inside a national park in Wyoming, one of the larger ones where reservations go through recreation.gov, and your license plate gets logged before you even arrive. I remember double-checking the confirmation email because I only reserved one night. Arrival, Thursday. Departure, Friday. Site, 42. I don't usually care about the site number, but 42 stuck in my head. It was near the tree line according to the map, far enough from the restroom building to avoid traffic, close enough to walk at night without a flashlight. When I pulled into the entrance around 5:26 p.m., the ranger booth was closed. A printed sign directed late arrivals to the self-check kiosk. The kiosk was mounted under a wooden shelter with a small overhead light. The screen glowed faintly in the early evening. I typed in my last name. The system paused for a second longer than expected. Then the screen displayed Site 42, occupied. I stared at it. Occupied. I checked the spelling of my name on the screen. Correct. I re-entered the confirmation number from the email. Same result. Site 42, occupied. A small message below it read, "Please see campground host." I stepped back and looked around the entrance area. 2 loops branched off into the trees. A metal bear box sat beside the kiosk. No host in sight. I pulled out my phone and reopened the confirmation email. Site 42. Arrival, today. Departure, tomorrow. Check-in time, 2 p.m. No modification notices. No cancellation alerts. No second reservation attached to my account. I drove slowly into the first loop towards Site 42. The campground was moderately full. A mix of trailers and vans, a few tents tucked deeper into the trees. When I reached Site 42, there was an RV parked squarely in the gravel pad. Lights on inside. A folding chair out front. A cooler beside the picnic table. Not abandoned, not half set up, fully occupied. I parked along the edge of the road and sat there for a moment, trying to figure out if I had somehow misread my own booking. The RV door opened. A man stepped out briefly, looked toward my vehicle, then back at his own site. He didn't wave, didn't look confused, just observed. I stepped out of my truck and approached slowly. "Hey," I called out casually. "Is this Site 42? He nodded once. "Yeah." "Did you just check in?" "No," he said. "Been here since yesterday." Yesterday. I felt that word land the same way it had in previous trips, when something didn't line up. "Under whose name?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. He shrugged. "Mine, I assume." He didn't offer it, didn't seem interested in clarifying further. I pulled my phone out and showed him the confirmation email. "Mine says I'm booked here tonight." He glanced at the screen briefly. "System must have double booked," he said. "Happens." He stepped back toward his RV door, as if the issue were already settled. I stood there for a few seconds longer, waiting for him to suggest switching or checking with someone. He didn't. He went back inside. The door closed. I walked back to my truck and drove toward the second loop. If Site 42 was occupied, maybe the host could reassign me. Halfway through the loop, I saw a small reflective vest hanging from a tree branch near Site 15. A campground host was seated at a picnic table, writing something on a clipboard. I parked and walked over. "Excuse me," I said. "I think there's a mistake with my reservation." She looked up calmly. "What site?" 42. She nodded slightly, as if confirming something already known. "You're checked in at 18, she said. "I haven't been to 18. She flipped a page on her clipboard and pointed to a printed sheet. Site 18. Occupant, my full name. Arrival, yesterday, 3:14 p.m. Departure, tomorrow, 9 a.m. I felt my pulse shift. "I just arrived 20 minutes ago," I said. She tilted her head slightly. You've been here since yesterday. The tone wasn't "shows your plate entered at 3:12 p.m." Shows your plate entered at 3:12 p.m. yesterday. My plate? She read it aloud. It was correct. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I walked back to my truck and opened the driver's door. The dashboard clock read 5:41 p.m. Today. I looked back at the host. She was still seated calmly, watching me without tension. "You might want to go back to 18, she said. "Your tag's already up." I stood there, trying to process that sentence. Your tag's already up. I hadn't hung any tag. I hadn't been to 18. But if the system believed I had, then someone else had checked in as me. Site 18 was at the far edge of the second loop. Less traffic, more trees, quieter than the front half of the campground. I drove there slowly, scanning each numbered post as I passed them. 14, 15, 16. The host hadn't followed me. She hadn't radioed anyone. She had simply returned to her clipboard as if the situation required no urgency. When I reached Site 18, it was empty. No RV, no tent, no vehicle parked in the gravel pad. But the fire ring contained fresh ash, not cold gray dust, blackened coals with faint white edges, used recently. A folding camp tag hung from the metal site post. It displayed my full name, correct spelling, correct reservation ID, correct arrival and departure dates. Arrival, yesterday, 3:14 p.m. Departure, tomorrow, 9 a.m. The time matched what the host had read. I stepped out of my truck and approached the tag slowly. It was laminated, standard park format, clipped through the hole at the top of the metal number plate. Official, not handwritten, not improvised. I touched it lightly. Solid, real, not something taped up as a joke. The picnic table showed signs of use, 2 faint circular watermarks, a small scrape on the bench surface where something heavy had dragged. The gravel pad held tire impressions, fresh enough that the edges hadn't softened. The tread pattern looked similar in width to my own vehicle, but not identical. I crouched and examined the tracks more closely. The depth suggested a vehicle slightly heavier than mine, a different alignment on the outer edges. Whoever had parked here had stayed long enough to settle into the gravel, and long enough to leave marks that hadn't been there an hour ago. I stood up slowly and looked around the tree line. The campground was quiet. No one walking dogs, no kids on bikes, no engines starting. It was as if the entire loop had emptied at once. I walked back to my truck and checked the dashboard tag I had printed at the kiosk when I first tried to check in. It listed Site 42, not 18. I opened the recreation.gov app again. My reservation now displayed. Site 18. Arrival, yesterday, 3:14 p.m. Departure, tomorrow, 9 a.m. I scrolled through the activity log. Check-in confirmed. Vehicle plate verified. Tag issued. Time stamped yesterday afternoon. I checked the photo library attached to the reservation. There was a small thumbnail image labeled Arrival Verification. The image was grainy, taken from an angle near the campground entrance. A vehicle passing the barrier arm, white body, roof rack, dark tinted rear window. It looked like my truck, but the timestamp beneath it read, yesterday, 3:12 p.m. I zoomed in. The license plate was partially visible. The first 3 characters matched mine. The last digits were blurred by motion. I checked the time on my phone. 5:58 p.m. today. If the system was correct, I had been here for over 24 hours already. If I was correct, I had arrived less than an hour ago. I heard gravel crunch lightly behind me. I turned. The host stood at the edge of the site, reflective vest catching the fading sunlight. "You finding everything okay?" she asked. "I wasn't here yesterday," I said evenly. She looked at the tag. "Your vehicle entered at 3:12 yesterday. System confirmed plate match." "That's not possible." She didn't argue, didn't accuse. She simply observed. "You're free to stay at 18, she said. 42's occupied." By who? She flipped through her clipboard again. Different reservation. Under what name? She didn't answer that directly. System shows no overlap, she said instead. No overlap. As if that resolved the contradiction. I looked back at the empty gravel pad. If someone had been here since yesterday under my name, they had packed up recently. The coals in the fire ring were still warm enough to hold shape. The tire impressions were fresh. The camp tag was official, and the system believed I had already been occupying this space for a full day. The host took one step back. Quiet hours are at 10, she said. Bear activity's been higher this week. Then she walked away, not hurried, not unsettled, just returning to her loop. I stood alone at Site 18, staring at my own name printed on a tag I had never hung. If someone had checked in as me, they had used my plate, my reservation, my arrival time, and they had left just before I arrived, or just before the system needed to reconcile the overlap. The containment wasn't about a blocked exit. It wasn't about a broken barrier. It was about occupancy. As far as the campground was concerned, I had already been here, and whatever had used my name had vacated the space just in time for me to inherit it. I didn't unload my gear right away. I stood in the center of Site 18, turning slowly, trying to map the physical space against what the system insisted had already happened. If I had been here since yesterday, there would be more evidence, more than warm coals and tire marks. I walked the perimeter of the gravel pad carefully. Near the edge of the tree line, I found a crushed water bottle partially tucked beneath a bush. Not mine. Different brand. Still slightly cold to the touch. The cap had been twisted back on tightly. I checked the picnic table again. Underneath it, in the shadow where the bench met the support frame, there was a small indentation in the dirt. Circular. About the size of a propane canister. Recently placed, recently removed. Whoever had been here had packed efficiently, not in a hurry, but not lingering either. I opened the recreation.gov app again and navigated to the detailed reservation history. Under vehicle entry log, there were 2 timestamps. Entry, yesterday, 3:12 p.m. Exit, not recorded. I stared at that line. No exit recorded. If the vehicle that entered under my plate had not exited, then either the system had failed to log departure, or the vehicle was still inside the campground. I looked up slowly and scanned the loop beyond the trees. There were no other vehicles parked at Site 18, but farther down the road, near the edge of the campground boundary where trees thickened and the gravel turned to packed dirt, I noticed something I hadn't paid attention to before. A dark SUV, parked at an angle just beyond the last numbered site. It wasn't in a marked space, not fully on the road either. It sat partly concealed behind 2 tall pines. Engine off, no lights on, no visible movement inside. I couldn't see the plate from this distance. It hadn't been there when I first drove the loop, or maybe I hadn't registered it. I took a few slow steps toward the edge of my sight to get a better angle. The SUV didn't move. No door opened. No interior light flickered. It simply remained there. I looked back down at my phone. The thumbnail image attached to my reservation showed my vehicle entering the park yesterday. White body, roof rack, dark tinted rear window. I compared it mentally to the SUV. The SUV was darker, different shape, but parked in a way that allowed clear sight of multiple sites at once, including 18. I felt a subtle shift in the dynamic. The system believed my vehicle had entered yesterday and never exited. The host believed I had been here since yesterday. Site 42 was occupied by someone who claimed they had been here since yesterday. And a vehicle that wasn't mine was positioned at the edge of the loop with a direct line of sight to my site. I turned and walked back toward the host's direction. She was still near Site 15, writing on her clipboard. "There's a vehicle down by the trees," I said. She didn't look up immediately. "There are several vehicles," she replied. "That one isn't in a sight." She glanced toward the direction I pointed. "Oh," she said softly. "That's permitted." "Permitted how?" "Overflow parking." "There's no overflow sign." She shrugged slightly. "It's allowed." Allowed. Everything seemed allowed, except leaving. I walked back to my truck and checked my own plate again, as if it might have been swapped without me noticing. Same number, same frame, no tampering. I opened my camera roll and scrolled back through recent photos. Gas station in Utah yesterday afternoon. Timestamp, 2:07 p.m. 200 miles south of this park. I zoomed in on the time and location data. Verified. There was no physical way I could have entered this campground at 3:12 p.m. yesterday, unless time had folded in on itself, or someone had duplicated my vehicle information, or someone had deliberately mirrored it. I walked to the metal post at Site 18 and removed the laminated tag with my name on it. It slid free easily. As I held it in my hand, I felt a brief hesitation. If I removed it, I would be altering the official state of the site, but leaving it in place felt like accepting occupancy I had not earned. I unclipped it and placed it on the picnic table. Then I turned toward my truck. The dark SUV's driver's side door opened, just slightly. Not wide enough to reveal who was inside, not enough to signal urgency, just enough to acknowledge that something had changed. I stopped walking. The door remained ajar. No one stepped out. No voice called across the gravel. The host did not react. She continued writing on her clipboard as if nothing had shifted. The containment was no longer subtle. It wasn't a blocked gate or a time paradox. It was positional. The system insisted I was already here. The site bore signs of prior use under my name. The vehicle entry log recorded no exit, and somewhere at the edge of the campground, someone was waiting. Not to confront, not to interfere, just to confirm that I had noticed. I decided to test the simplest variable first, leaving. If the system believed I had entered yesterday and never exited, then attempting to exit should either correct the error or confirm it. I got into my truck and started the engine. The sound felt louder than it should have in the thinning evening light. As I pulled away from Site 18, I glanced toward the dark SUV. The driver's side door was closed again, no visible movement, but the vehicle was now angled slightly differently than before, more aligned with the access road. I couldn't be certain it had moved, only that its orientation felt adjusted. I drove toward the campground exit at a steady pace. The barrier arm stood down across the road. The kiosk screen lit automatically as I approached. It displayed my name, Site 18, active stay. Below it, a message appeared. Departure not permitted during active stay. Departure window, tomorrow, 9 a.m. I stared at the words, tomorrow. I had booked one night. Arrival today, departure tomorrow. Not arrival yesterday. Not departure tomorrow morning after 2 nights. 1 night. I tapped the screen. No change. I rolled down the window and scanned the kiosk housing for a call button or emergency contact. Nothing obvious. I checked the app again. Reservation status. Checked in. 2 nights. Stay duration. Yesterday. Tomorrow. 2 nights. Not 1. I scrolled down. Under Activity Log, a new entry had appeared. Tag reissued. 6:02 p.m. today. I checked the time. 6:04 p.m. I had removed the laminated tag from Site 18 approximately 2 minutes earlier. I looked back toward the campground loop. The host was no longer at Site 15. The dark SUV had moved closer. It was now parked halfway down the loop road, not fully concealed by trees anymore. Still engine off. Still no visible occupant stepping out. I reversed slightly and parked near the kiosk. Then I stepped out and walked back toward the host's previous location. She was now standing near Site 20, speaking to no one in particular, clipboard in hand. "The barrier won't open," I said evenly. She nodded once. "Your stay is active." "I only booked 1 night. You arrived yesterday." "No, I didn't." She didn't argue. She didn't insist. She simply looked at me with the same calm expression she had worn since the beginning. "System shows continuous occupancy," she said. What vehicle exited under my plate? She flipped through a page on her clipboard. No exit recorded. So whoever entered under my plate is still inside. She didn't answer that directly. You're welcome to remain at 18, she said instead. I turned slowly. The SUV was now parked directly across from Site 18, close enough that if someone stepped out, they would be within 20 feet of the gravel pad. The windows were tinted dark, no movement inside. The containment had shifted from abstract to positional. The system believed I had been present since yesterday and had not left. The barrier refused to release me until the departure window that matched that false timeline. The host behaved as if the record was correct, and a vehicle that did not belong to me had taken up observation directly across from the site bearing my name. I walked back to Site 18 on foot. The laminated tag was hanging from the metal post again. I had left it on the picnic table. Now it was clipped back in place. Arrival, yesterday, 3:14 p.m. Departure, tomorrow, 9 a.m. I looked toward the SUV. No door opened, no gesture made, but the alignment was clear. Whoever had entered under my name had either never left, or had left only after ensuring I would inherit the record. The physical barrier at the campground entrance was not the primary containment. The primary containment was temporal. I could not exit until the system's version of my stay had completed, and until then, I remained logged. Present, occupied, whether I acknowledged it or not. I stood in the fading light at Site 18, staring at my own name printed on the tag. The SUV idled silently across the road, and for the first time since arriving, I understood that even if the barrier arm lifted tomorrow at 9 a.m., the record of my presence here would not match my memory, and the system would not be the only thing that believed I had already stayed longer than I remembered. I didn't sleep much that night, not because of noise. There wasn't any. No generators, no distant laughter, no car doors slamming, just wind moving lightly through pine branches and the occasional metallic click of cooling gravel. The SUV remained across from Site 18 until well after dark. At some point, its headlights flicked on briefly. Not high beams, just parking lights. Then they shut off again. No door opened. No silhouette crossed the beam. It simply existed in my peripheral vision long enough that my mind stopped trying to categorize it as unusual. Around midnight, I checked the recreation.gov app again. The reservation status had not changed. Active stay. Departure. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. Under site activity, there was a new thumbnail image, captured at 8:47 p.m. The photo showed Site 18, my truck parked in the gravel pad, the picnic table visible in frame, and across the road, partially obscured by trees, the dark SUV, as if fixed. There were no visible cameras, not from ground level, not from a camper's perspective, from higher up, as if mounted, as if fixed. There were no visible cameras on the site when I arrived. I zoomed in on the SUV within the thumbnail. The plate was blurred by compression, no identifying marks visible. But my truck's plate was sharp, clear, documented. At 8:59 a.m. the next morning, I started the engine and drove toward the exit without checking the app again. The SUV was gone. The loop was empty. The host stood near the entrance, clipboard in hand, as if waiting for routine departures. The kiosk screen lit up. Site 18, departure window active. The barrier arm lifted immediately. No delay, no error message. I drove forward without looking toward the host. The arm lowered behind me with mechanical precision, as if nothing irregular had occurred. 2 weeks later, I logged back into my account. Stay history, Site 18, arrival, Tuesday, 3:14 p.m. Departure, Friday 9 a.m. Duration, 3 nights, 3. I had physically been inside the campground for less than 16 hours, but the system showed 3 full nights of occupancy. Attached to the reservation were 4 verification images, 1 for each day. Day 1, arrival. Day 2, midday activity. Day 3, evening verification. Day 4, departure. Each photo showed Site 18 occupied. my truck present, the picnic table used, firewood stacked neatly beside the ring. In one image, a folding camp chair sat open near the edge of the gravel. I don't own a folding chair like that. In another image, a cooler sat beside the table, different brand from mine. The timestamps were evenly spaced across 3 days. The lighting matched the time of day indicated. The metadata showed GPS coordinates consistent with the campground. I zoomed into the license plate in each photo. It was mine, perfectly legible. The background remained consistent. Same trees, same slope, same metal site post. Only subtle differences in object placement suggested activity across multiple days. According to the system, I had lived there, not someone pretending to be me, not a clerical glitch, not a double booking. The record reflected continuous, documented presence under my name and plate. I contacted recreation.gov support once. I didn't mention the SUV. I didn't mention the duplicate entry. I simply asked why my stay duration showed 3 nights when I had reserved 1. The response was polite. According to their system, I had extended the stay on site via kiosk confirmation. There was no billing discrepancy. The charge had been processed and settled. There was no evidence of unauthorized activity. Case closed. I never returned to that park. I removed my license plate from online reservation autofill systems. I stopped saving vehicle details in campground accounts. But occasionally, when I log in to check availability for other trips, I scroll past the stay history. Site 18 still appears in the archive. 3 nights, 4 verification photos, full occupancy, documented presence. And sometimes I wonder which part unsettles me more. That someone entered under my name before I arrived, or that when I finally did arrive, the system adjusted my memory to match theirs. Because if the photos are accurate, if the timestamps are legitimate, if the record is immutable, then somewhere inside that campground, for 2 nights I do not remember, I was already there. Most people think leaving a campground is simple. You pack up, you drive out, the gate lifts. But sometimes, you don't leave when you think you do. Sometimes the record keeps you longer. Sometimes the system remembers nights you don't. If any of these stories felt even slightly possible, that's the part that should bother you. The next story is worse.